Chapter 89. When the deep and distant bell rang in the living room, Li Tianlan and Wang Yuetong opened their eyes almost at the same time. "Morning." Li Tianlan greeted her and seemed a little embarrassed. "Morning." Wang Yuetong chuckled. Her beautiful red and swollen eyes seemed to have faded, and her eyes were full of vigor. Her soft eyes looked very charming. She blinked and whispered, "Senior brother, what do you think?" "Very good." Li Tianlan tilted his head awkwardly and said. After receiving Qin Weibai's call, Li Tianlan forcibly restrained his emotions mixed with desire and feelings. He spent a night alone with Wang Yuetong. Although nothing excessive happened, it didn't mean that what happened before the phone call didn't exist. Last night, the light in the living room was not turned on, so Li Tianlan didn't feel anything. But now, as the sun rose, he looked at Wang Yuetong's rosy and beautiful mouth again and found it a little red and swollen. Instead of being ugly, it looked a little more lovely than usual. Li Tianlan subconsciously recalled Wang Yuetong's sweetness and gentleness, and the more he thought about it, the more fascinated he became. Perhaps a man's so-called bottom line was so fragile. No matter how firm he was in his rejection before, once he took the first step, everything after that would seem to be logical and logical. Even his sense of guilt would become smaller and smaller. This was probably what it meant by getting out of hand. Li Tianlan shook his head hard and shook the charming thoughts out of his mind. He got up and walked off the sofa. He carefully felt his body, and his face became calmer and calmer. Before the sword at the Sky Academy, his body was like a deep well filled with water. After that, all his essence, qi, spirit, vitality, and potential completely poured out like water from the well. Tribulation barely suppressed the sword, which was equivalent to leaving some water for the well. But the foundation at the bottom of the well had been completely damaged, and the small amount of water was still leaking out little by little. His strength was getting stronger and stronger, and his body was getting weaker and weaker. Almost every minute and every second, he was rapidly approaching death. Li Tianlan didn't know what the so-called most precious treasure of the Wang family of Beihai was, but now he had completely understood its nature-defying effect. As soon as the bottle of purple liquid entered his abdomen, endless vitality began to replenish his completely dry body. Now his body was still like a deep well that was almost dry, but the bottom of the well that had been completely destroyed condensed again and was even more solid than before. Right now, his body's condition was still not too good. At the very least, the state of a thunderclap kick and a chi-controlling kick still showed that his life force could not suppress the constantly expanding power. However, under the consolidation of the mysterious potion, his life force was no longer flowing away. In other words, under normal circumstances, Li Tianlan was now out of danger. Although he still had no hope of entering the invincible realm, he didn't have to be completely desperate. If he had a chance to fill the deep well in his body with water again in the future, as more vitality came in and suppressed his strength, he would be healed. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and stretched himself. He turned to look at Wang Yuetong and said softly, "Thank you." Wang Yuetong, who had accompanied Li Tianlan to meditate on the sofa all night, sat on the sofa with her legs together, hugged her knees, and looked at him. Her beautiful eyes were full of affection. Li Tianlan walked to the French windows of the villa and looked out quietly. 8 o'clock in the morning. Rain was falling from the gloomy sky, and the air was slightly cold. In front of the villa, the potholes caused by Dongqing Wudi's sword had not been repaired, and there were already some large and small puddles in the yard. His sight was full of greenery. The green lawn and the straight trunks of the sycamore were fresh and clean under the washing of the rain. Li Tianlan stood quietly in front of the window, his mind clearer than ever. He had almost exhausted all of his vitality and potential with this sword, but he had obtained the Imperial Jade Seal and the Curtain Intelligence Department, which symbolized great luck. He was out of danger, but there was no hope of being invincible for the time being. This day was full of ups and downs, gains and losses. It was too wonderful. Before there was a definite way to help him recover from his injury, he didn't think he had gained anything, but at least he wouldn't lose too much. The faint sound of footsteps echoed in the dark living room. Wang Yuetong came to the window and held Li Tianlan tightly from behind. Her delicate little face was pressed against his back, and she silently listened to the rain outside the window. She whispered softly, "I'm sleepy." Li Tianlan had ups and downs yesterday, and Wang Yuetong's heart was also full of ups and downs. She was afraid that she had never been so rich in her life. Beihai province was far to the north of the northeast. It was a journey of 7 or 8,000 kilometers from Huading and back in one day. She not only had to deceive the high-level officials of the Wang family of Beihai, but also had to avoid the sight of the Wang family of Beihai in Huading. All of this was for a man who called her a bitch, who could know the grievances and resentment in her heart. After a night of meditation, Wang Yuetong finally couldn't bear it anymore. She held the man in front of her, who made her somewhat angry, somewhat and somewhat at ease. Her eyelids suddenly began to fight. "Go and have a rest. There are guest rooms upstairs." Li Tianlan turned around and touched Wang Yuetong's hair. He didn't know how to deal with the relationship with Wang Yuetong now, but he couldn't treat her coldly in any way. Now that things had come to this, he could only let nature take its course. Speaking of upstairs, he suddenly remembered several assassins belonging to the curtain. The 9 elites had all turned into a pile of black ash, but the blood on the wall was still there. Qin Weibai was not there, so he had to clean up these chores. A trace of shyness quietly climbed up Wang Yuetong's face. She raised her head and quickly glanced at Li Tianlan with her watery eyes. She seemed to be a little hesitant. "What's wrong?" Li Tianlan asked directly. Wang Yuetong bit her red and moist lower lip, which had become a little numb because of red and swollen. After hesitating for a while, she whispered like a mosquito, "Didn't she say that we can use your bedroom?" She stood in front of Li Tianlan with her tall and slender body and lowered her head. For a moment, even her tender white neck turned red. "You can use it too." Li Tianlan only felt a bang in his head, and then his mind went blank. No one knew how tempting and fatal this implicit and wild invitation was. Especially at this stage in the morning, when the noble and pure little princess trembled and said that even she could be used by him, Li Tianlan's eyes almost turned red in an instant. Li Tianlan gasped a few times, swallowed, and said in a hoarse voice, "Let's go. I'll take you to the guest room first." Wang Yuetong, who had summoned up the courage to invite Li Tianlan to enjoy herself in the master bedroom, was waiting for Li Tianlan's answer or action nervously and fearfully. Hearing his words, her heart suddenly became cold again. "Senior brother, you still don't want me, do you?" Wang Yuetong asked softly, "Am I being cheap again? Am I particularly shameless in your eyes?" Li Tianlan felt a sharp pain in his heart, and for a moment he did not know how to explain. Some words were like knives. Perhaps they weren't malicious, but they were absolutely sharp. They were sharp enough to cut a pure and exquisite young girl's heart into pieces, and then turn it into a knot in her heart, a scar that was so bloody that it couldn't be healed. Li Tianlan did not know if he owed Wang Yuetong one or many apologies. Looking at her pretty face that had become a little pale again, he reached out to hold Wang Yuetong's shoulder and let her raise her head to look at him. "You're not a bitch. No one will regard a girl who is willing to die with him, and even willing to give up her dignity and pride to become humble as a bitch, do you know?" Li Tianlan looked into Wang Yuetong's eyes seriously and said solemnly. Wang Yuetong's eyes lit up, and her face became ruddy again. This time, it was not because of shyness, but because of excitement. "I've said that I'm actually a very selfish person. The reason why I want to be even with you is that I know that no matter what happens in the future, it's unlikely that I will get back together with the Wang family of Beihai. If I become enemies with the Wang family of Beihai in the future, what should I do? What should you do?" Li Tianlan laughed at himself and said, "There are some things that I don't want to bear, and you may not have the courage to bear them. There will be a way." Wang Yuetong muttered to herself, and her tone became softer and softer. "There must be a way." Li Tianlan took a deep look at her and said softly, "Go to rest first, and we'll talk about it when you wake up. I'm waiting for sixth sister to come over and ask her to bring me something. I'll inform her when you're meditating." Wang Yuetong shook her head, and her legs moved a little unnaturally. She had given her first kiss last night. One had no experience, and the other had little experience, but the two novices kissed passionately. It was not until a long time after they separated that Wang Yuetong found that her underwear had been completely soaked and sticky, and even her jeans had some wet marks. Girls loved cleanliness, so she managed to endure it all night. Before dawn, she couldn't help but call the enchantress. "You're not going home?" Li Tianlan was stunned for a moment, and then he looked at Wang Yuetong and asked. "I don't dare to go back and I can't go back." Wang Yuetong shook her head and said pitifully, "Senior brother, I'll stay with you during this period." Li Tianlan was silent for a long time, and then he nodded slightly. He knew why Wang Yuetong couldn't go back. The bottle of potion he drank last night was the most precious treasure of the Wang family of Beihai. What did the most precious treasure of a top rich and powerful family mean? Li Tianlan didn't know the specific value of the most precious treasure, but it could make his body recover to this extent overnight. It was not an exaggeration to describe its value in any way. After all, life was the most precious thing above everything else. Li Tianlan didn't know how long the potion last night could bring a person's life, but even if it was only for a short period of time, the value of the potion was immeasurable. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, and his eyes were firm. At present, he couldn't come up with anything that could be compared with the most precious treasure of the Wang family of Beihai. He didn't want to say anything crazy, but he had made up his mind that this kind of thing would eventually be returned. He gently held Wang Yuetong in his arms, holding her slender and elastic waist, and remained silent. The sound of a car horn could be heard outside the villa. Through the clean and bright floor-to-ceiling windows, a blue Porsche parked at the door in the rain outside the villa. The door opened, and the enchantress, wearing a thin black windbreaker and holding a box, got out of the car. She opened the front compartment of the car and took out another suitcase. In Li Tianlan's sight, she held the box in one hand and pulled the suitcase with the other, walking directly to the front door of the villa. The constantly falling rain evaporated before it approached. The enchantress walked briskly, graceful, mature and enchanting. Li Tianlan let go of Wang Yuetong and let her trot to open the door. The enchantress handed the suitcase in her hand to Wang Yuetong and walked into the villa with the box in her hand. The box vibrated slightly in her hand, and it seemed to contain a living thing. Li Tianlan glanced at the box, nodded slightly, and said nothing. The relationship between the two seemed to be a little awkward. At the very least, he called her sixth sister. At least, he couldn't call her sixth sister now. "Did you take the immortality potion?" The enchantress looked at Li Tianlan with complicated eyes. Li Tianlan nodded silently and said nothing. At this time, it was inappropriate to say anything. "Yuetong," the enchantress spoke softly and shook her head. "His Majesty is very angry. Yuetong is simply crazy. Do you know how much she has sacrificed for you? There are about 2 or 3 portions of the potion you took in Zhongzhou State, 1 or 2 portions in Germany, and the rest are in the Wang family of Beihai, but there are less than 10 portions. For hundreds of years, several invincible realm experts of the Wang family of Beihai would rather die than waste a bottle. Even His Majesty has not been so extravagant. Yuetong stole it and gave it to you. His Majesty was so angry that he almost broke off the father-daughter relationship with her." Li Tianlan subconsciously glanced at Wang Yuetong. Although he had tried to overestimate the preciousness of the most precious treasure of the Wang family of Beihai, listening to the enchantress's words, he still felt that he had underestimated it. The enchantress hesitated and continued, "Of course, if you are willing to join the Wang family of Beihai." Before she could finish her words, Li Tianlan's cell phone suddenly rang. Li Tianlan glanced at her, nodded, and walked aside to take out his cell phone. Behind him, the enchantress put the box on the tea table, looked at Wang Yuetong and whispered, "Don't go back for the time being. His Majesty is angry, and Madame dares not to plead for you." Li Tianlan took a deep breath and looked at the caller ID. It was a strange number. He pressed the answer button and said hello. "Young Master Li, this is Lu Xiyuan." On the phone, a dry and dull voice sounded. Li Tianlan could hear how reluctant and unreconciled the other party was just from his voice. Li Tianlan was expressionless and said coldly, "Say it." The imperial jade seal was in his hands. No matter how much the Lu family hated him, they could only be obedient dogs now. On the phone, Lu Shuyuan took a deep breath with great humiliation and said in a low voice, "We just got the news that last night, the Samsara Palace launched a large-scale attack on the Night Spirit Organization in Billy State. The Night Spirit Organization was destroyed, and the Blue Sky Underworld, one of the 12 murderous weapons, has fallen into the hands of the master of Samsara Palace." Li Tianlan's heart suddenly shook. "What about the casualties of the Samsara Palace?" "I'm not sure yet." Lu Shuyuan said calmly. "Zhongzhou State has made a response. He Ping, one of the standing committee members of Huading and the director of the Ministry of Politics and Law, has been suspended. Xiuqing failed to become an executive member and is said to be taking over He Ping's position. Tan Qinghua is said to be transferred out of the Eastern Theater of Operations. Dongcheng Qiuqi, the mayor of Wudong New Area, is said to be the secretary. Bai Qingqian was transferred to Guangzhou. It is said that she is also the secretary." Lu Xiuwei told them the information he had obtained. The people and things he mentioned were more or less related to Li Tianlan. "Bai Qingqian?" Li Tianlan frowned and asked. "General Dongqing's wife, Miss Bai. Guangzhou has always been considered the territory of the academic faction." Lu Xiuwei explained. "Oh," Li Tianlan said and hung up. Samsara had destroyed Night Spirit and obtained the murderous weapon. He Ping and Tan Qinghua's suspension and transfer were undoubtedly the goodwill that Zhongzhou State had shown to Samsara. As for the rest, perhaps it was the cooperation between the academics and the Dongqing clan. He held the phone and subconsciously dialed Qin Weibai's number. However, he found that the other party's phone was turned off. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and walked back to the living room absent-mindedly. He was getting more and more worried. In the living room, Wang Yuetong was holding a golden puppy and talking to the enchantress. Seeing Li Tianlan coming over, she got up gently and said with a smile, "Senior brother, sixth sister brought my dog here. I'll give it to you. How about we take it to the Sky Academy?" Li Tianlan nodded with a smile and took the puppy in his arms. "It's very cute." "Well, it's called Baby. It's only 3 months old." Chapter 90. As the youngest provincial administrative district in Zhongzhou State, Beihai Province, the land that once belonged to Snow Country and East Island, covered nearly 160,000 square kilometers. It was close to Zhongzhou State, sandwiched between Snow Country and East Island, like a dazzling pearl in the northeastern sea area of Zhongzhou State. Since the return hundreds of years ago, Beihai Province had been a major political province, economic province, and resource-rich province in Zhongzhou State. Today, it might not be the most developed province in Zhongzhou State, but Beihai Province, whose economic strength had always been in the front line of Zhongzhou State, was definitely the most beautiful place in the whole Zhongzhou State. There were a total of 11 cities in the North Sea Province. Among them, there were 2 sub-provincial cities and 9 prefecture-level cities. Close to 20 million people lived and worked in peace and contentment here. Moreover, as time passed, the population of each city in the North Sea Province would increase every year. With such an intuitive indicator, even a blind person could see that this young province's development potential had not yet reached its limit. This was the most special province in Zhongzhou State. There was an army and a system that belonged only to Beihai Province. For hundreds of years, countless senior officials and generals of Beihai Province went out from here, but few cadres from outside came in. This was autonomy in the truest sense of the word. It was unprecedented, and it might not be repeated in the future. Beihai Province belonged to Zhongzhou State. This was the issue that everyone, including the senior officials of Beihai Province, emphasized. But in the hearts of Beihai people, Beihai Province only belonged to Holy Mountain and the wealthy family on Holy Mountain. The provincial capital of Beihai Province was Shenzhou. The mountain not far from Shenzhou City was the Holy Mountain in the hearts of Beihai people. It was the place that dominated the entire Beihai Province, the headquarters of the Wang family of Beihai. Beihai Province and Zhongzhou State had laws that were generally similar but not exactly the same. The appointment of the provincial senior officials, the unimpeded policy in the province, the appointment of military generals, everything in Beihai Province was recommended to Zhongzhou State after the decision of the Wang family of Beihai. It was no exaggeration to say that any brick picked up on this 160,000 square kilometers of land was surnamed Wang. In Beihai province, the entire holy mountain was the most mysterious and majestic place. It was the forbidden area of Beihai province and could be called the supreme one. Sacred Mountain was just what the common people in Beihai called it. The official name here was Beihai Mount Emperor Bing, which was located in the north of Beihai province. Everything in the province could be seen clearly under the close observation of this majestic forbidden land, even in the slightest. 12 o'clock at noon. When the sky was the best, Wang Tianzong, the current patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, appeared at the foot of Mount Dibing. He looked at the clear sky and waited quietly. Wang Xianxia stood quietly beside Wang Tianzong. His face was calm, and there was no impatience in his eyes. Instead, there was a hint of a smile. Time passed slowly as they waited. The sunlight grew warmer. Wang Xianxia, who was motionless, finally looked down at his watch and said softly, "Dad, it's time." Wang Tianzong nodded and said calmly, "Almost." Wang Xianxia grinned. Beside their dignified and silent father, he and Wang Yuetong had always been the most open-minded. They were not afraid of saying the wrong thing. Basically, they said what they thought. "Dad, can we keep him in Mount Dibing this time? Our ancestors in the past," Wang Tianzong's eyes flickered and he shook his head slightly. After one night, the anger of losing the immortality potion seemed to have been completely suppressed by him. His tone became calm again. He has made up his mind to ignore the affairs of the world. This time he is just a guest. Let's not talk about anything else. He just wants to annoy us. Wang Xianxia nodded and seemed to be a little regretful. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "What do you want to say?" Wang Tianzong glanced at his son. Looking at his pale face, he felt helpless and thought of his precious daughter. That girl was really spoiled. She was spoiled by him, her mother, Wang Xianxia, and the whole Wang family of Beihai almost spoiled her, so that she easily made a big trouble this time. In order to create the illusion that she was missing, Wang Xianxia seriously injured himself. He was gratified that the brother and sister had such a good relationship, but he was more angry after losing the immortality potion. "Dad, you're and his strength. Of course it's me." Wang Tianzong chuckled and interrupted Wang Xianxia's words. "That guy has strength, but he is too lazy. It seems that the general trend of the world has nothing to do with him. He has no combat experience. No matter how strong he is, he can't beat me." "Oh," Wang Xianxia said disappointedly. "I wanted to pester him to teach me. Since he is so weak, then forget it." "Nonsense." Wang Tianzong scolded with a smile and shook his head slightly. "If he is really willing to teach you," he paused and shook his head. "Forget it. It's probably impossible." Wang Xianxia suddenly knew that his father's words were insincere. In other words, he was bragging. The corner of his mouth twitched. He held back his laughter and slowly raised his head to look at the mountain road. A small but majestic motorcade slowly appeared in sight. Two Mercedes-Benzes surrounded an elongated black Rolls-Royce slowly approached and finally stopped in front of Wang Tianzong. The driver got out of the car and opened the door. A middle-aged man who looked about the same age as Wang Tianzong got out of the car with a smile. He walked a few steps quickly and said, "Tianzong, why are you so polite?" The middle-aged man was dressed in soft and comfortable casual clothes and sneakers. He was pulling a suitcase with an unknown brand, looking casual and unrestrained. Handsome and unrestrained. This was Wang Xianxiao's first impression when he saw him. The last time he saw this uncle, he was a teenager who had just entered the chi-controlling realm. His impression of the past had been a little vague. The only thing he remembered was that this uncle, who lived in seclusion in Switzerland, had a very good temper and was very handsome. 7 or 8 years had passed. Now that he saw him again, Wang Xianxiao's vague memory suddenly became clear, and even the image completely overlapped. After 7 or 8 years, he seemed to have not changed at all. His face was still handsome and strong, and his smile was free and easy. The only change was that he seemed to be more unrestrained than when they met last time. It was a kind of leisure and unrestrained from his bones, as if everything in the world was fleeting in front of him, leaving no trace. Wang Xianxia glanced at his father, then at this uncle, and subconsciously made a comparison in his mind. His father was extremely calm. He just stood quietly, looking ordinary, but when looked closely, he was like the sea between heaven and earth, with a kind of magnificent and vast momentum. The uncle in front of him was leisurely and free, and his every move showed a real sense of nature. He really did whatever he wanted, as if everything he did was a normal thing. Wang Xianxia smiled modestly, but his eyes were thoughtful. According to his second uncle, if this uncle in front of him could also be regarded as a person in the dark world, after Li Guangtu's treason, he should be the only person who could compete with his father. He shook his head subconsciously. Was this the real man who didn't show his face? I haven't seen you for many years. It's etiquette for me to come down the mountain to pick you up. I can't let my friend pick on me, can I? Wang Tianzong took a step forward and shook hands with the middle-aged man. Watching the Rolls-Royce behind him leave directly, he frowned slightly and joked, "Fengning, didn't you say you came with Chuxue? Where is she? Why, are you afraid that I, as her uncle, will force her to be my daughter-in-law?" That girl, the handsome man named Fengting, shook his head and said, "Don't worry about her. I'm afraid she will come here by herself later. She said she had never been to Beihai University and wanted to walk around. Just let her be. Anyway, she knows the way." Wang Tianzong nodded and said with a smile, "Why do you suddenly think of Beihai?" Fengting shook his head and said helplessly, "I was in Zhongyun province. 2 days ago, I met the old faker at Luojing airport. He said I should come to Beihai. He was mysterious, so I didn't take it seriously. But Chuxue took it seriously and pestered me to come here. Didn't she go to Shenzhou to look for opportunities as soon as she got off the plane? That old monk is kind and should not have any bad intentions. I'm just an idle person, so I let it go." Wang Tianzong nodded casually and didn't think much about it. He said flatly, "Xiao, don't you know your uncle Fengting?" Wang Xiao was still thinking about who was stronger between his father and Uncle Fengting. When he heard his father's words, he suddenly came to his senses and said with a respectful and modest smile, "Uncle Feng, long time no see." "He's absent-minded." Wang Tianzong frowned slightly and said with a smile, "This boy just asked me who was stronger and who was weaker. I guess he was distracted when he saw you." Fengting laughed heartily. From his laughter, Wang Xianxia couldn't hear any competitiveness. There was only a pure sense of freedom and carefreeness. "I can't beat your father. He slashes anyone he sees. I don't fight. No one has provoked me these years. I don't even know how to hold a sword. I can't beat him." He waved his hand and said with an indifferent smile. Wang Xianxia smiled bitterly and coughed. He didn't know what to say. "What's wrong with you? You're badly injured." Fengting glanced at Wang Xianxia and seemed a little surprised. Wang Tianzong's face darkened. He snorted and said, "Ignore him. He only knows how to make trouble all day. Fengting, let's go." Fengting nodded with a smile. He pulled the suitcase and walked beside Wang Tianzong. They went up the mountain together. "For many years, you and I haven't contacted each other. I thought you were still blaming me for what happened in the past. If it weren't for that old faker, you wouldn't have come to Beihai, would you?" Wang Tianzong walked on the road in the mountains and said with emotion. "What happened in the past?" Fengting thought for a while, shook his head and said nothing. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes slightly and sighed softly. Just by looking at his old friend's attitude, he already knew that he still had a grudge about what happened in the past. "Even if I rank first on the divine list, I can't do whatever I want. I'm the patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai first, and then Wang Tianzong." Wang Tianzong said softly. Looking at Fengting, who was still silent, he laughed at himself and said, "Forget it. You just arrived. Let's not talk about this. I'll arrange a place for you to rest first." "No hurry." Fengting shook his head and said with a smile, "Let's go to the stage of formidable person first." The stage of formidable person. If Mount Dibing was the forbidden area of the entire Beihai province, then the stage of formidable person at the highest point of Mount Dibing was the forbidden area of the entire Mount Dibing. In addition to Wang Tianzong, there were no more than 5 people in the entire Wang family of Beihai who could enter the stage of formidable person at any time. Feng Ting was also one of them, or even the only one. Wang Tianzong nodded silently. When he was about to speak, he suddenly looked up at the top of the mountain. Feng Ting raised his head almost at the same time and slightly narrowed his eyes. On Mount Dibing, the rolling thunder roared, and the wind and clouds surged in the whole sky. The fighting intent and killing intent rose at the same time. A kind of momentum that seemed to go straight to the 9th heaven and into the clouds instantly filled the entire top of the mountain, with extreme fierceness and sharpness. There was sword intent scattered all over the top of the mountain, layer upon layer. A clear female voice sounded and echoed in the whole Mount Dibing. The sound lingered endlessly, like a phoenix dancing in the 9th heaven. Chapter 91. There was one more chapter before 12 o'clock. I, Samsara, am here to see His Majesty the Sword Emperor. The clear female voice echoed in every corner of Mount Dibing. The momentum was soaring, like the cry of a phoenix. She said she was here to see him, but this way of appearance was not even peaceful, not to mention low-key and humble. The strong fighting intent and killing intent spread between heaven and earth, with extreme majesty and dominance. She looked down on the world and was insufferably arrogant. This was the most direct provocation to the entire Wang family of Beihai. For hundreds of years, generation after generation of experts in the dark world came out and shone in the world. But without the permission of the Wang family of Beihai, no one dared to climb Mount Dibing. This was the peak of martial arts in the entire dark world. It was supreme, and at least there were people who could be on par with it. An invincible realm expert broke into Mount Dibing, which meant a full-scale war with the Wang family of Beihai. It meant that he had to directly face the human emperor, who ranked first among the 12 murderous weapons in the dark world. It meant that he had to face numerous experts in the Wang family of Beihai. There were constant conflicts among the superpowers in the dark world. They could use the most violent way to start a full-scale war. This was the result that no one wanted to see. Wang Tianzong's eyes narrowed slightly, but his expression was still calm. He stepped up the mountain at a steady pace, but his indifferent and cold voice instantly spread throughout Mount Dibing. Samsara Highness has just killed Night Spirit, and you can't wait to show your power to the Wang family of Beihai? Isn't it too hasty? Who is Samsara Highness? Feng Ting walked beside Wang Tianzong, his expression unchanged, but he asked casually with some surprise. Wang Xianxia was even more surprised. He couldn't help but ask, "Uncle Feng Ting, you don't know Samsara Palace? What does it have to do with me?" Feng Ting looked puzzled. "She didn't provoke me. Why should I know?" He paused and smiled, looking a little proud. "I haven't heard of her, but she hasn't heard of me either. That's even." Wang Xianxiao's mouth twitched. It sounded like an ordinary person in Zhongzhou State telling him, "Hey, I don't know the president of Zhongzhou State, but the president doesn't know me either. That's even." The artistic conception was really similar. Wang Xianxiao subconsciously glanced at his father, only to see that Wang Tianzong was still climbing up the mountain slowly. He didn't speed up or slow down, but his breath was getting calmer and calmer, which was unpredictable. Wang Xianxiao shook his head gently. The Samsara Palace, which had just destroyed Night Spirit, would undoubtedly become one of the new superpowers in the dark world. However, the master of Samsara Palace directly went to Mount Dibing. If today's battle was destined, how long could the Samsara Palace exist? Was it just a flash in the pan? She's so domineering even when asking for help. This woman is interesting. Wang Tianzong suddenly spoke in a calm tone. At the top of Mount Dibing, there was no need for Wang Tianzong to open his mouth. The moment the clear and melodious voice sounded, the experts of the Wang family of Beihai had already reacted immediately. A thunder-shocking realm expert led the team. Fire-flaming realm and ice-condensing realm experts rushed to the place where the sound came from. In the shortest time, the entire Mount Dibing seemed to be moving. There were people everywhere, fast, steady, orderly, without the slightest panic. On the top of the Emperor weapon, there were vast palaces, solemn and simple, and flowers bloomed like a sea. A figure wrapped in a black cloak stood quietly on the Sword Emperor Palace, where Wang Tianzong usually lived, motionless. The cold wind whistled past her, but her clothes were in a completely strange state of stillness. Looking at more and more figures converging on her, her momentum soared, as if to break through the sky. Saint of the Samsara Palace requests to see His Majesty the Sword Emperor. The crowd on the top of the mountain was like a tide, and it was getting closer. A gentle and slow voice, carrying with it a sharp and majestic sword intent, suddenly exploded above a palace in the northwest. Along with this voice resounding out, numerous other voices followed closely behind. They were clear, calm, and revealed a form of pride and firmness that disregarded everything. Military Counselor of the Samsara Palace requests to see His Majesty the Sword Emperor. The calm voice rang through the southeast area of Mount Dibing, calm and steady. General of the Samsara Palace requests to see His Majesty the Sword Emperor. The southwest was covered by a deep voice, like muffled thunder. Duke of the Samsara Palace requests to see His Majesty the Sword Emperor. An elegant and weird voice in the northeast chuckled like the wind. Azura of the Samsara Palace requests to see His Majesty the Sword Emperor. In the east, a momentum full of destructive aura suddenly rose. Horsewoman of the Samsara Palace requests to see His Majesty the Sword Emperor. In the west, there was a solemn and dignified female voice. Azure Dragon of the Samsara Palace requests to see His Majesty the Sword Emperor. In the south, lightning flashed. The light was bright, and the thunder rumbled. Swordsman of the Samsara Palace requests to see His Majesty the Sword Emperor. In the north, the sword light was sharp, and the sound was like a sword. In 8 directions, 8 figures covered in black cloaks appeared almost at the same time. It was a spectacular scene. The elites of the Wang family of Beihai all stopped where they were. Instead of panicking, they became more and more eager to fight. There was still a voice whistling above, proud and firm. Flaming Fire of the Samsara Palace requests to see His Majesty the Sword Emperor. Ghost of the Samsara Palace requests to see His Majesty the Sword Emperor. Shadowless of the Samsara Palace requests to see His Majesty the Sword Emperor. Doctor of the Samsara Palace requests to see His Majesty the Sword Emperor. Finally, 4 figures appeared in the Sword Emperor Palace at the same time, standing motionless beside the Master of Samsara Palace. At this moment, even the strong-willed elites of the Wang family of Beihai couldn't help showing a strange expression. Saint, Military Counselor, General, Duke, Azura, Horsewoman, Azure Dragon, Swordsman, Flaming Fire, Ghost, Shadowless, and Doctor. Someone was famous in the Dark World. Someone was mysterious in the Dark World. The 12 figures in front of them had an unusually loud name in the entire Dark World. The 12 Super Masters of the Samsara Palace. The Samsara Palace had just destroyed Night Spirit. Led by their most mysterious palace master, the 12 Super Masters went straight to Mount Dibing. What were they going to do? In the crowd, several experts of the thundershocking realm from the Wang family of Beihai narrowed their eyes and remained silent. The Samsara Palace destroyed Night Spirit. The Dark World was turbulent, and all the superpowers were destined to set off a storm. Would the source of this storm be the Samsara Palace and the Wang family of Beihai? What's the matter? Wang Tianzong's voice sounded again. With his voice, he appeared directly in front of the Master of Samsara Palace from the mountain road. Above the Sword Emperor Palace, he stood in the air at the highest place, looking at the Master of Samsara Palace and asking seriously. In the Dark World, strength was supreme, and the strong were respected. For hundreds of years, the reason why the Wang family of Beihai was feared and respected was that they had enough strength. The Master of Samsara Palace could withstand the full blow of Blue Sky Underworld and kill Tian Exen, who ranked 10th on the World Divine list. Now she led the 12 Super Masters straight to Mount Dibing. Whether they were enemies or friends, Wang Tianzong couldn't neglect her strength and courage. "I want to borrow something from your Majesty," the Master of Samsara Palace said calmly. She was very tall, at least 1.8 meters. She was a little fat, but it was not obvious in the cloak. Instead, she looked extremely tall and plump. She raised her head and looked at Wang Tianzong, who was hanging above. She didn't want to be serious with him when she needed his help. It was the most appropriate way to borrow something from a top wealthy family like the Wang family of Beihai and keep a low profile after showing her strength. "Oh, what is it?" Wang Tianzong looked at the black cloak in front of him and asked calmly. The voice of the master of Samsara Palace was very mellow and natural, which many foreigners couldn't imitate. If you listened carefully, you could feel the difference. For example, among the 12 supermasters of Samsara, Duke and Horsewoman were Europeans, Azura and General were Americans, Flaming Fire and Swordsman were East Islanders, and Shadowless was born in Snow Country. No matter how fluent they were in Chinese, they would always have a trace of foreign accent. Wang Tianzong looked calm, but his eyes were thoughtful. Could it be that the mysterious master of Samsara Palace, who no one had ever seen before, was from Zhongzhou State? "I want to borrow medicine." The master of Samsara Palace said calmly, "I have a sister. Her favorite man is in trouble, and only the Wang family of Beihai can save him. I want to borrow an Immortal series from the Wang family of Beihai. Please help me, Your Majesty." Borrow an Immortal series. Not just a bottle of Immortal series. There were 4 kinds of medicine in the Immortal series. The first generation Immortal series, the second generation Immortal series, Youth, Longevity Lock, and 2 auxiliary medicines, Consolidation and Activation. The 6 medicines together were priceless, which was the core foundation of the entire Wang family of Beihai. Borrow? This word was said politely, but in fact he was robbing. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes, and his body hanging in the air fell slightly. Finally, he stood at the same height as the master of Samsara Palace. "You want to borrow the Immortal series?" "Because I'm the master of Samsara Palace." The master of Samsara Palace said indifferently. "You're so confident." Wang Tianzong smiled. "But it's not enough, so there's no need to talk about borrowing medicine." "Not enough." The master of Samsara Palace suddenly took a step forward, and the temperature in her voice suddenly dropped. "Not enough." Wang Tianzong said calmly, "Palace Master, if you want to take it by force, you can try." His body rose again, and his voice became unprecedentedly majestic. "You and your 12 supermasters, come together." He waved his hand slightly. All the elites of the Wang family of Beihai in front of the palace suddenly retreated like a tide. In less than a minute, the front of Sword Emperor Palace was empty, leaving only the master of Samsara Palace and the 12 supermasters. Wang Tianzong looked calmer. He had challenged the entire Samsara by himself. In the whole dark world, he seemed to be the only one who had such confidence. The master of Samsara Palace was motionless and seemed to be lost in thought. However, the killing intent of the 12 supermasters scattered around her skyrocketed, and the overwhelming killing intent all rushed to Wang Tianzong. "You're forcing me." The master of Samsara Palace finally said, "No one can despise Samsara, not even you." Wang Tianzong's eyes gradually became cold, and he said nothing. The clothes of the master of Samsara Palace, which were strangely still in the wind, suddenly began to flutter violently. Her body slowly rose above Sword Emperor Palace, and finally reached the same level as Wang Tianzong. On Mount Dibing, all the fierce fighting intent and killing intent suddenly disappeared. The master of Samsara Palace's body floated in the air, standing in front of Wang Tianzong, and instantly became extremely empty. She reached out to Wang Tianzong and said calmly and forcefully, "Give it to me." Wang Tianzong's tone was cold. The master of Samsara Palace quietly floated in the air, keeping the posture of reaching out, silent. At this moment, the sea of flowers and the palace on Mount Dibing seemed to disappear completely. The mountain was getting farther and farther away. The sea was getting farther and farther away. The master of Samsara Palace was motionless, but in an instant, everyone felt that the two of them seemed to be separated by mountains and rivers. She gently took a step back. The clothes of her slightly plump figure fluttered, and there was a kind of breathtaking feeling. 10 meters away, Wang Tianzong's pupils suddenly contracted. Only one step. In front of him, the master of Samsara Palace just took a step back, but in his mind, she seemed to have retreated thousands of miles, to the ends of the earth, to the outside of the world. Side by side with heaven and earth, coexisting with the world. Wang Tianzong's eyes lit up, which had never been seen before. In my life, I don't want much, and there are not many things I care about. The voice of the master of Samsara Palace drifted, as if it came from the sky. But as long as I want it, I must get it. The Sword Emperor can't stop me, and the number 1 on the divine list can't stop me. Wang Tianzong's eyes focused, and he didn't speak. Only the voice of the master of Samsara Palace echoed between heaven and earth. I don't care about the future of Samsara, and I don't care about the life and death of the 12 supermasters. Wang Tianzong, I'll say it again. I want the whole Immortal series. Will you give it to me? No. Wang Tianzong's voice filled the world. The master of Samsara Palace chuckled, and her voice was as clear as a silver bell. I don't have the title of the Sword Emperor, and I don't have the glory of the first on the divine list. I also admit that I'm no match for you. She stood in front of Wang Tianzong, and her outstretched palms closed slightly. Crack. The clear cracking sound echoed in every corner of Mount Dibbing. On Mount Dibbing, all the air began to twist in a state that no one had ever heard of. The cracking sound became more and more intense. The voice of the master of Samsara Palace was calm, and there was no fluctuation. But I have a sword. She looked at Wang Tianzong seriously. With one sword I will die, and you will be seriously injured. Under the slaughter of the 12 supermasters, how many people in the entire Wang family of Beihai and the entire Mount Dibbing will be left? The Wang family of Beihai will be destroyed. After you recover, you will be invincible in the world. So what? No matter how you retaliate, it's none of my business. Wang Tianzong, I'm different from you. I'm a madman. I can ignore the consequences, but can you afford to gamble? She closed her palms completely. The air was extremely compressed, and a slender long sword was completely formed in her hands. All the air nearby was still constantly twisting into a mass, and it was chaotic. Under the scorching sun, the light was still bright, but in the twisted air, everyone's eyes were blurred. The master of Samsara Palace held the sword hilt tightly. There was no sword energy in the air, and her whole person seemed to be illusory. In a trance, she seemed to become another person. In Wang Tianzong's sight, everything was changing. The figure of the master of Samsara Palace had disappeared, and a figure in white appeared in front of him in the constantly compressed air. He held a sword in one hand, and he was in high spirits. He moved forward in heaven and earth, waved his sword, and killed the enemy. From the thunder-shocking realm to the invincible realm, he swept everything away. It was a kind of invincible aura. He was bloodthirsty, calm, and crazy. No one could stand in front of him. All the living beings in the mortal world, the gods and demons in the sky, disappeared under his sword. Sand, desert, deep sea, city, wind and rain. He moved forward all the way, and the sword intent became thicker and thicker. Countless enemies fell in front of him. All the pictures became pale, fixed, and finally disappeared. It seemed to be a heavy snow. Wang Tianzong closed his eyes and opened them again. The figure in white had already disappeared. The master of Samsara Palace stood in front of him silently with a sword in one hand. Only the momentum that could almost make the sky fall and the earth crack was still rising. At the same time, on the mountainside, Feng Ting, who had been climbing the mountain slowly with Wang Xianxia, was shocked and looked up in surprise. Wang Xianxia, who was confused, just wanted to speak, but his arms suddenly shook. He lowered his head slightly. In his sight, the suitcase brought by Uncle Feng Ting was shaking violently. There seemed to be a living thing in the suitcase, struggling to get out. The sound of metal crashing kept ringing in the suitcase. Clang, clang. The 15th blade. Feng Ting opened his mouth gently and murmured to himself. Bang. The suitcase in Wang Xianxiao's hands suddenly exploded, and the daily necessities were scattered all over the ground. In the suitcase, a simple and ferocious long sword whistled up. The long sword was unsheathed, and a scarlet sword blade flashed away. The sword intent all over the sky was released, and it echoed with the sword light at the top of the mountain. I owe the Li family a sword stroke in the past. Is it finally time to pay it back? Feng Ting grabbed the sword blade. The long sword kept shaking in his hand, but it could not leave his control and fly to the top of the mountain. It turns out that he is really a master, not a fraud. He murmured to himself. His figure flashed, and he rushed to the top of the mountain in an instant. The 15th blade? In front of the Sword Emperor Palace, Wang Tianzong looked at the master of Samsara Palace in front of him and said softly. The 24 moves of Sword of the War God family of Zhongzhou State shocked the dark world, and several moves belonging to the Invincible Manual were said to be invincible in the world. But among the 24 moves of sword, the 15th blade was the one with the most profound sword intent, the most brilliant talent, and the most unpredictable. This move did not only belong to the Invincible Manual, but also had a name that was very suitable for the Samsara Palace. The 15th blade, Samsara. The 15th blade was the reincarnation of sword momentum and artistic conception, and it was the extreme condensation of essence, qi, and spirit. There were similar unique skills, such as the Bloody Azura of Azura Path, but the Bloody Azura burned potential. Compared with the sword intent of the 15th blade that reincarnated the past, it was completely different. Wang Tianzong had seen Li Kuangtu use the 15th blade. He borrowed Li Honghe's sword intent and once killed an expert at the peak of the Thundershocking Realm when he just entered the Thundershocking Realm. Except for those who were familiar with the 24 moves of sword, no one knew what was going on with this move. Wang Tianzong only vaguely knew that the 15th blade was similar and imitated, but its artistic conception was more profound. It was the most thorough integration and sublimation of willpower and power. For example, when Li Kuangtu was in the Thundershocking Realm, he could reincarnate Li Honghe's sword intent in an instant. In the 24 moves of sword, this was the most special move. Not only others, but also every move in the 24 moves of sword. The 15th blade could reincarnate perfectly. This could be said to be the ultimate killing move in the 24 moves of sword. After one move, all the essence, qi, and spirit of the swordsman would be consumed, and he would fall into an unprecedented period of weakness. Depending on the situation, there was even the risk of death. To put it simply, the 15th blade was a high-level imitation unique skill. This move itself was only the foundation, but the sword imitated by the opponent was the most terrible. Wang Tianzong closed his eyes again and frowned slightly. The figure that appeared in front of him just now was clear and vague in his mind. When he thought about it carefully, he found that he seemed to be completely strange to the opponent, but also somewhat familiar. The master of Samsara Palace did not imitate Li Honghe, not Li Kuangtu, but the sword in front of him was indeed the 15th blade. Whose sword intent did she imitate? Is it worth it to fight with me desperately for a sister? Wang Tianzong opened his eyes and said in a cold tone, I used to care about the most, but I destroyed her with my own hands. Now I only have her. Do you think it's worth it? The master of Samsara Palace's tone became calmer. The long sword in her hand was slightly raised. Crack! The Sword Emperor Palace under her instantly shattered into pieces in the violent distortion of the air. Stop! A hasty shout suddenly rang out. Feng Ting held the long sword in his hand and instantly rushed through the distorted air, appearing directly between Wang Tianzong and the master of Samsara Palace. With his back to Wang Tianzong, he looked at the master of Samsara Palace and said with a bitter smile, Don't get excited. It's just a small thing. Do you need to fight to the death? The master of Samsara Palace did not move her sword. The cloak covered all her expressions, so no one could see her expression. Feng Ting took a deep breath and looked at the strange, chubby, tall woman in front of him. He tentatively said, You are... The master of Samsara Palace finally looked at him and said blandly, Get out of the way. I'm talking to you. Feng Ting said helplessly, I'm a great expert anyway. I suddenly appeared here. I asked who you are. Don't you ask who I am? Lin Feng Ting. After the ancestors of Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun, Your ancestors founded Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun and then lived in seclusion in Switzerland. They stood aloof from worldly affairs and handed Zhuanyuantai over to their disciple, the Li family. What's there to ask? The master of Samsara Palace's tone was indifferent. Lin Fengting's body trembled slightly. Even Wang Tianzong's face changed slightly. How do you know? Lin Fengting asked subconsciously. It doesn't matter. The master of Samsara Palace said calmly, I want a copy of the Immortal series. Give it to me or fight. She looked over Lin Fengting at Wang Tianzong, and her fighting desire grew stronger. You're from the Li family? Wang Tianzong said softly. His tone was not a question, but a statement. The simple sentence made the sword intent of the master of Samsara Palace suddenly stagnate, and her tone became a little confused. I don't know. Wang Tianzong took a deep look at her and slowly landed on the ground, thinking. What happened in the past? He opened his mouth, but before he finished, he was interrupted by the master of Samsara Palace. I'm not interested in what happened in the past. I want a copy of the Immortal series. As for what happened in the past, we don't owe each other anything from now on, and our grievances are written off. Can you represent the Li family? Wang Tianzong's eyes flashed. The master of Samsara Palace was silent for a while and said blandly, Li Tunlan is the descendant of the Li family. I can't, but he can. Tianzong. Lin Fengting landed beside Wang Tianzong and said calmly and seriously, I know I don't have enough face, but if possible, give it to her. How about I come to the Wang family of Beihai as a guest next year? Come next year? Wang Tianzong took a deep look at him. What he said was obscure. What he said was ambiguous, but he knew what it meant. The grudge in the heart of this old friend of many years seemed to vanish with this Immortal series. I can give you the Immortal series. Wang Tianzong took a deep breath and said, but today you broke into my Mount Dibbing, and I have to ask for an explanation. The sword intent was mighty in the violently twisted air. On Wang Tianzong's palm, a delicate long sword with infinite sword energy was slowly formed. The master of Samsara Palace trembled slightly, and all the twisted air around her was slowing down. The long sword in her hand suddenly disappeared, and her body fell to the ground again. I'm willing to take a sword strike from your majesty to express my apology. The master of Samsara apartment said blandly. Wang Tianzong suddenly waved his hand. The delicate long sword instantly shot toward the master of Samsara Palace. The long sword was delicate and slender, but when the blade rushed out, the whole world seemed to gather at one point and crazily press toward the master of Samsara Palace. The king of the world. The power of heaven fell in panic, and there was no way to resist. The unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai. Sword of Emperor Path. In front of the master of Samsara Palace, layers of air twisted madly. It became blurred. The sword of Emperor Path pierced the air with irresistible force, moving forward with indomitable will. The master of Samsara Palace put her palms together. In the twisted air, she took a step forward and clamped the blade of the sword. Boom! With the master of Samsara Palace as the center, a strong airwave suddenly appeared in all directions. The turf, trees, rockery, and palaces nearby were all lifted up, turned into powder, and scattered. The master of Samsara Palace retreated nearly 10 meters, and a mouthful of blood spurted out of her mouth. But Wang Tianzong's figure had disappeared. Lin Fengting smiled bitterly and explained, he went to get the medicine. The master of Samsara Palace replied in an indifferent tone. Lin Fengting became more and more curious. He narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the master of Samsara Palace, who was wiping the blood from the corners of her mouth. He said in a strange tone, Who the hell are you? The master of Samsara Palace stopped wiping the blood and said calmly, My surname used to be Gu. It was published a little late. The chapter with more than 6,000 words was supposed to be divided into 2 chapters, but he gave up after thinking about it. Chapter 92. Wang Yuetong lived in Yonghua Villa. One day had passed since the start of the Sky Academy. Li Tianlan didn't return to the academy, And the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai didn't even mention him. It was said that Wang Tianzong had left Huading. No one knew whether he left in a hurry without informing Zhuang Huayang or because the old headmaster neglected something. In short, the search task issued by the Sky Academy was still in progress. Although the Sky Academy had officially opened, countless people were still searching for the attractive 200 credits of the search task. Sometimes, when Li Tianlan looked at Wang Yuetong who was wandering in front of him, he even felt that he was looking at credits. Li Beidian, Ning Qianxing, and Yu Qinyan all called and asked why Li Tianlan hadn't returned to the school. Li Tianlan could only say that he was temporarily occupied, especially to Yu Qinyan. He couldn't tell the truth. The old man Yu Donglai had regarded him as the only hope. If he knew his current state, God knew how much he would suffer. Sitting in the living room, Li Tianlan thought of the old man and hesitated. He knew that the most important thing to do now was to meet Yu Donglai, but he didn't know how to explain his current state to him. At present, his vitality had completely stabilized. With the supplement of the immortality potion, he could live for at least 3 to 5 years. At the same time, his realm was also stabilized. One step was chi controlling, and the other was thunder shocking. Now he was unprecedentedly powerful in terms of combat capability, but the price he paid was that he had no hope of entering the invincible realm for the rest of his life. It was even impossible for him to enter the thunder-shocking realm completely. In such a situation, it was impossible for Li Tianlan to be in a good mood, but he didn't despair either. After all, he was still alive. He had experienced too much despair in the desert of Beijiang that year. Now all this was at best a trivial matter for him. He didn't want to complain, let alone feel disappointed or afraid about the future. Now he just wanted to do something. But this was also the biggest problem, because he couldn't find a suitable entry point at all. At present, he was not even familiar with Huading, let alone the case of treason. The curtain was the most powerful weapon he could use at present, but it could not provide much help for the case of treason. In this case, his best choice was to go to Yu Donglai. In recent years, Yu Donglai had stood aloof from worldly affairs and stayed dormant in Huading. But Li Tianlan was sure that he must have some clues. No matter how small and fragmentary the clues were, it was better than nothing. As long as he had an entry point and gave it to the curtain, Li Tianlan could do a lot more. Outside the window, the rain was getting heavier. Li Tianlan sat silently in the living room and made a pot of tea. The rain continued for 2 consecutive days, turning from moderate rain to heavy rain, making the whole city noisy. Sitting in the villa and looking out of the window, the whole Huading seemed to be far away from the bustling city, leaving only desolation. A thin coat was put on Li Tianlan from behind. Wang Yuetong's sweet voice sounded behind him. "Senior brother, aren't you cold? You can't catch a cold in your current condition." Wang Yuetong, who had just taken a bath, sat beside Li Tianlan with the newborn golden retriever in her arms. She chuckled and said, "Do you want to watch TV?" Smelling the fresh and fragrant smell around him, Li Tianlan smiled and said, "Whatever. When are you going back to the Sky Academy?" "Whatever." Wang Yuetong flipped her long hair, which was still a little wet. She held the dog in one hand, stretched out her snow-white and tender little foot, pressed the remote control, and said casually, "I'll go whenever you go. Didn't the academy give me a task? I've been living in seclusion recently. I'll wait for you to take me to the Sky Academy to get my credits." "I'm afraid the task will be cancelled in a few days." Li Tianlan smiled helplessly. "In my current condition, going to the Sky Academy is a complete waste of time. Fortunately, although my vitality has been consumed a lot, my combat strength has increased a lot. Recently, I plan to do something and have no time to accompany you. How about you go to the Sky Academy first? Otherwise, when the headmaster cancels the task, credits will be deducted. Do you want to wait to be expelled?" The internal management of the Sky Academy was strict and loose. There was a saying that credits trumped everything. In theory, as long as one had enough credits, it didn't matter how long one was absent. 1 credit would be deducted for each day of absence. When the credit was deducted to a negative number, the teaching office of the academy would contact the student to confirm the student's status. Under such circumstances, if the student still refused to go back to the academy, the teaching office would hand over the student's information to the political department. The political department would discuss whether to delete the student's file. If the answer after the discussion was yes, the political department would issue a notice to completely remove the student from the Sky Academy. If the answer after the discussion was no, the political department would send the student's information back to the teaching office, which would come up with a punishment decision to see the follow-up effect. Because of the entrance maneuver, Li Tianlan had 50 credits. Wang Yuetong originally had 80 credits, but she used 60 credits to exchange a bottle of healing potion for Li Tianlan. Now she only had 20 credits left. If Wang Yuetong didn't go to class and the academy's task was cancelled, her information would be sent to the political department 20 days later. It doesn't matter. I'll call Uncle Yi later. I won't be expelled. At most, I'll have to bear a few punishments. I can make up for it with credits later. Wang Yuetong casually changed the channel with the remote control. Her big eyes blinked and her long eyelashes trembled slightly, making people want to pounce on her and kiss her. Uncle Yi? Li Tianlan was stunned. Yi Fengqing, the director of the political department of the Sky Academy and a good friend of my second uncle. Wang Yuetong sat cross-legged on the sofa and chuckled. Her body was soft and it seemed that she wanted to lean into Li Tianlan's arms. The little golden retriever in her arms jumped onto Li Tianlan's arm first and gently licked the back of Li Tianlan's hand. It was a little itchy. Li Tianlan nodded with the dog in his arms and then shook his head. Anyway, let's go back quickly. He handed the dog in his hand to Wang Yuetong, stood up and said, I'm going out. He still decided to see you Dong Lai. Otherwise, there was no point in staying here every day. With his current strength, he could defeat almost all the freshmen and seniors and even most of the teachers and directors when he returned to the Sky Academy. Li Tianlan had no confidence at all to fight against tribulation. Not to mention confidence, Li Tianlan couldn't even escape if he really fought against him. Except for tribulation, he was also a little afraid to fight against Zhuang Huayang. But except for these two, he dared to fight against anyone. But obviously, it was not his goal to dominate the Sky Academy. From the moment his hair turned white, he didn't plan to go back to the Sky Academy. As for credits, it didn't matter at all if they were deducted. Then come back early. Wang Yuetong stood up with the dog in her arms and walked to Li Tianlan in slippers. It seemed that she wanted to see him out. Li Tianlan put on his clothes and went straight to the door with Wang Yuetong. The key was inserted into the lock and the sound of the door opening was heard. Li Tianlan's expression froze and then became ecstatic. He almost rushed to the door. Wang Yuetong was also stunned. Looking at Li Tianlan's excited back, she subconsciously held the golden retriever in her arms tightly, seeming a little nervous. Qin Weibai's figure appeared at the door. Looking at Li Tianlan, who rushed to her excitedly, she was stunned, and her cold eyes suddenly became soft. Have you eaten? She walked in with flaming fire, bent down at the porch to take off her high heels, and said softly. The weather in Huading in May was not cold. It was rainy and cloudy, and it was just a little cool outside. But Qin Weibai was wearing a very thick coat, and her dreamy face was full of haggardness and exhaustion. Her face was pale, and even her rosy and beautiful lips were bloodless. Li Tianlan's heart sank. He suddenly took a step forward, looked at Qin Weibai seriously and said, Are you hurt? I was attacked by two people at the peak of the thundershocking realm in Billy State, but they were blocked by horsewomen. I was slightly injured, but it's okay. I'll be fine after a few days of recuperation. Qin Weibai said with a chuckle. Her eyes, which had been a little dim, gradually brightened up when she saw Li Tianlan. She took off her coat and put on her slippers. She directly put her arms around Li Tianlan's neck and kissed him hard on the face. Then she smiled and said, I missed you so much. Li Tianlan put his arms around Qin Weibai's slender waist, and his heart gradually became calm. He whispered, It's okay, it's okay. Come, I've brought you something good. Your injuries will heal very quickly. Qin Weibai took Li Tianlan's hand, and her eyes were happy. My sister took a lot of effort to get it back. You must thank her someday. She took Li Tianlan's arm and walked to the sofa. When she passed by Wang Yuetong, she looked steadily forward, as if she did not see her at all. At this moment, Qin Weibai was wearing a gray sweater and black tights. Her ordinary clothes showed her perfect figure completely. She held Li Tianlan's arm casually, and at this moment, she completely became the hostess of the family. Wang Yuetong, whose hair was still a little wet, was wearing pajamas and holding the dog. She looked lazy and beautiful, but in front of Qin Weibai, she did not have much confidence. It seemed that every time she appeared in front of her, Wang Yuetong felt that she was dwarfed. She bit her lip hard, walked to the other side of Li Tianlan with the dog in her arms, and sat down almost next to him on the sofa. Li Tianlan glanced at her, and his face seemed a little unnatural. Wang Yuetong's face also turned red. All of Qin Weibai's movements were natural, and even her sitting posture was very casual. But her performance was a little deliberate. Li Tianlan opened his mouth subconsciously and wanted to explain, but Qin Weibai seemed to see nothing and waved at Flaming Fire, who had just entered the door. Flaming Fire came over with a clear crystal box and put it on the tea table. The light in the living room was on, and the soft light fell on the crystal box. The light refracted out was colorful and had a very strange and dreamy feeling. Li Tianlan's eyes fell on the pattern in front of the box, and he slightly raised his eyebrows. The simple lines on the pattern were majestic and impressive. Li Tianlan had seen this pattern before. It was on the membership card that Wang Xiaoyao handed him when he went to the garden party for the first time. The sky and the sea. This is something from my family. Wang Yuetong's small face changed slightly and she said softly. Qin Weibai glanced at her and nodded slightly. Suddenly she said, "Did you give Tianlan the first generation of immortality potion?" Wang Yuetong glanced at her and nodded. "Thank you," Qin Weibai said with sincere and earnest eyes. Any expert in the dark world knew the status of the immortality potion in the Wang family of Beihai. For Li Tianlan, Wang Yuetong could do so much, so Qin Weibai was grateful to her. Wang Yuetong curled her rosy lips. Listening to Qin Weibai's sincere thanks, she subconsciously tightened her arms around the little golden retriever in her arms and felt wronged and wanted to cry. The golden retriever seemed to be in pain from being squeezed. It struggled and whimpered, climbed out of Wang Yuetong's arms, past Li Tianlan, and directly got into Qin Weibai's arms. "That's my dog." Wang Yuetong felt more wronged and wanted to cry. She couldn't compete with a man, but could even her pet not compete with her? "We are a family. Why should we separate ourselves?" Qin Weibai smiled casually, intentionally or unintentionally, with a meaningful meaning. Wang Yuetong suddenly blushed. Li Tianlan's heart trembled, and he didn't dare to say a word. Flaming Fire had opened the box in front of her and looked at the potions inside. She said calmly, "This is the Immortality series of the Wang family of Beihai. The whole set is here. It is still being activated. It will be finished in about 8 hours. By then your injury will be completely healed." Immortality. The whole set. Li Tianlan looked at the box, lost in thought. Immortality series? Wang Yuetong suddenly stood up and stared at Flaming Fire. She said in a cold tone, "Where is my dad? What did you do to him?" The Immortality series was the most precious treasure of the Wang family of Beihai. If the people of Samsara could get it, then her father, Wang Yuetong's heart trembled violently. Her Majesty Sword Emperor ranks first on the divine list. Who can do anything to her? This is a deal. My sister took a sword strike from her and got this set of Immortality series at the cost of serious injury. Qin Weibai said calmly. As for whether she deliberately simplified the process or it was just the version she heard from the master of Samsara Palace, no one knew. After a long silence, Li Tianlan looked at Qin Weibai and said seriously, "Thank the palace master for me." "What palace master? You have to call her sister in the future." Qin Weibai muttered with some dissatisfaction and sighed softly. "I wanted to stay and take care of my sister. When she recovered, I could ask Flaming Fire to give the Immortality series to you. But Marshal Dongqing and Headmaster Zhuang made an appointment with me, so I came back on the way. Tunlan, time is tight. I have to leave in a minute." Li Tunlan was stunned and couldn't come to his senses for a while. My sister was seriously injured. When she fought with Tianqin, she was seriously injured, and then she went to the Wang family of Beihai. Qin Weibai held Li Tianlan's hand and said softly, "When she recovers, I will come back to accompany you as soon as possible." Li Tianlan nodded silently. He said softly, "Why did the marshal and the headmaster make an appointment with you?" "Not only me, but also you. And Zhong Yongming." Qin Weibai gently raised the corner of her mouth. Her smile was playful and beautiful. "Zhong Yongming." Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes slightly and remembered the information sent back by the Curtain organization yesterday. Yesterday afternoon, the organization department of Zhongzhou State and the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State simultaneously announced several heavyweight personnel transfers. Lu Xiuqing, the deputy mayor of Huading, served as a member of the Standing Committee of Huading and the director of the Ministry of Politics and Law. He Ping, the former director of the Ministry of Politics and Law, was under investigation for major violations of discipline. Bai Qingxian, the governor of Qinzhou Province, was transferred to Guangdong Province as the first secretary. Dong Qingqiuqi, the mayor of Wudong New Area, served as a member of the Standing Committee of Huading and secretary of Wudong New Area. Tan Qinghua was transferred to the Southern Theater of Operations of Zhongzhou State as the deputy commander. The former chief of staff of the Southern Theater of Operations, Wang Lin, was transferred to the Eastern Theater of Operations as the deputy commander. In less than a few days after Samsara destroyed Night Spirit, Zhongzhou State immediately reacted. What this meant was self-evident. The stability of Huading that Zhong Yongming had always emphasized did not come true after all. On the contrary, the commander of the Eastern Theater of Operations, Ning Ziyuan, mentioned strengthening the unity of the Eastern Theater of Operations. The high-level officials of Zhongzhou State gave clear support and attitude. As for what was happening in Zhongzhou State in private, it was beyond his reach for the time being. However, Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang made an appointment with Qin Weibai and Zhong Yongming. The fact that the other party had accepted the invitation was enough to explain the situation. Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang. Chapter 93. Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang came quickly. Before they finished a cup of tea, their figures had passed through the heavy rain outside and knocked on the door of the villa. "Boss Qin, congratulations." Looking at Qin Weibai, who opened the door for them, Dongqing Wudi said with a smile. His tone was gentle and casual, and there seemed to be some intimacy. The Samsara Palace destroyed the Night Spirit organization in one fell swoop, and the murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld changed hands. This could be said to be the biggest thing that happened in the Dark World in recent years. In just a few days, there were constant disturbances. At present, the rise of the Samsara Palace as a new superpower in the Dark World was already unstoppable. Not only Zhongzhou State, but in the past few days, many countries around the world held high-level meetings, trying to get in touch with the Samsara Palace and test their attitude. Zhongzhou State was now in a favorable position. At the plenary meeting of the decision-making committee, the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State made prompt decisions. They took He Ping, transferred Tan Qinghua, and promoted Dong Qingqiuqi, which could be said to be the goodwill released by Zhongzhou State. As one of the members of the decision-making committee of Zhongzhou State, Dongqing Wudi personally attended the meeting in Yuzhou. At the meeting, a member of the academics even proposed to invite the Samsara Palace to develop in Zhongzhou State, but it was strongly opposed by the Southeast Group, the Special Warfare Group, and the Prince Group. In the end, the matter was left unsettled. But this could also be seen as a tentative move by the academics. Now it was opposed, which could only mean that the time was not ripe enough. When this topic was mentioned next time, it was estimated that the academics directors would come forward. At that time, it might become a contest between the six. From the standpoint of the Dongqing clan, there was no way for them to stay out of it. So now looking at Qin Weibai again, Dongqing Wudi could not simply regard her as someone who competed with his daughter for her fiancé. Comrade? One of our own? Alliance? This strange feeling was mixed together, and the sense of distance between them seemed to be blurred a lot. Same. Qin Weibai gently raised the corners of her mouth. Her smile was beautiful, calm, and generous. She glanced at Dongqing Wudi and said seriously, "General, thank you." When the master of Samsara Palace and the 12 supermasters went straight to Mount Dibing, Dongqing Wudi happened to appear in the Black Dragon Army of the Border Control Corps. The Black Dragon Army was one of the 5 armies under the Border Control Corps, with a total of 100,000 elites. It was responsible for the defense of the northeast border of Zhongzhou State. If 30,000 elites traveled by sea and land, it would take them less than 2 hours to enter Beihai Province. What this meant was self-evident. Dongqing Wudi took a deep look at Qin Weibai, smiled, and asked Zhuang Huayang to enter the villa together. "Boss Qin, the body of the attacker is still in the Sky Academy. I brought some photos here. Have a look. If you don't recognize him, I'll ask someone to throw the body into the Yangtze River." Zhuang Huayang walked in and handed Qin Weibai an envelope. He smiled at Li Tianlan and Wang Yuetong, who were in pajamas, and said with a strange look in his eyes, "You look good. When will you go back to the Sky Academy?" "I'll go back today." Li Tianlan smiled. He had intended to do something, but now the whole set of immortality potion had appeared. If his injury was completely healed, the vitality in his body would completely suppress his current strength and turn it into potential. His realm would also be stabilized in the chi-controlling realm. Without the incredible combat capability, the door of the invincible realm would open to him. In this way, re-entering the Sky Academy became his top priority. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm. The gains and losses didn't seem to affect his state of mind at all. Zhuang Huayang patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder with a gratified look in his eyes. Beside him, Dongqing Wudi's eyes were obviously not quite right. He looked at Li Tianlan and then at Wang Yuetong, who was in pajamas, and said in a gloomy tone, "Tianlanyu, good boy, when we were in Zhongyuan province, you swore that you would not marry Rushi. I thought you were a gentleman. But in just a few days, Wang Yuetong can live in Yonghua Villa in front of Qin Weibai. In this case, why don't you marry my daughter?" Qin Weibai thought. "Rushi is a girl as pure as ice and clean as jade. She is no worse than the little princess in front of me. If you refuse, do you really think I dare not force you to marry Rushi?" Dongqing Wudi was almost bursting with anger. His face became more and more gloomy, and it seemed that he was really angry. Flaming fire. Qin Weibai, who stood aside and opened the envelope, suddenly spoke. She looked at the photo of the black-robed corpse in the envelope, and her tone was a little cold. She handed the photo in her hand to Horsewoman and sneered. "I was wondering who was planning to fish in troubled waters in Zhongzhou State. It turned out to be him. Tell Horsewoman to go to the Sky Academy later, bring out this man's body, and throw it to Hanyu Palace." Flaming Fire took the photo silently and glanced at Qin Weibai. "Don't you need to say anything?" "No." Qin Weibai said indifferently, "I'm waiting for him to give me an explanation." Flaming Fire nodded and began to make a phone call. Zhuang Huayang turned his head in surprise and looked at Qin Weibai. "Boss Qin, does the attacker have anything to do with Hanyu Palace?" They were not close just now, so he only vaguely heard Hanyu Palace, but he did not hear the specific details. In fact, the academics had also secretly investigated the identity of the black-robed man, but they found nothing. If the other party really had something to do with Hanyu Palace, then they had to be cautious. In Huading, Hanyu Palace was just a club, but the power behind this so-called club had been extremely vigilant for hundreds of years. Qin Weibai shook her head slightly and did not say much. Instead, she looked at Dongqing Wudi, whose face was a little gloomy, and asked curiously, "General, what's going on?" Li Tianlan looked embarrassed and did not know how to explain at all. He had kissed and hugged the beautiful little princess of the Wang family of Beihai. He could not tell Dongqing Wudi that she had nothing to do with him, but he always felt awkward to admit that they had something to do with each other. He did not know what to say, but Qin Weibai came over again. Li Tianlan suddenly felt even more annoyed. Dongqing Wudi suppressed his anger, glared at Li Tianlan, and said hesitantly, "Boss Qin, little Princess Yuetong, yes, she's my sister." Qin Weibai's tone was light, with an indescribable grace. Wang Yuetong blushed. Wang Yuetong blushed. She saw Qin Weibai's eyes sweep over her. Qin Weibai's eyes were not so stern, but there was an inexplicable pressure in them. She bit her lip and called her sister in a low voice. Her face became even redder. But strangely, when she called her sister, she did not feel that she had to swallow her anger. Instead, she felt that it was natural. Qin Weibai nodded and looked at Dongqing Wudi again. Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang smiled bitterly at the same time. Sister? What the hell was going on? The master of Samsara Palace and the 12 supermasters of Samsara went straight to Mount Dibbing. 13 of them went up the mountain and 13 went down the mountain. Although they did not fight, Wang Tianzong's Sword Emperor Palace was torn to pieces by the sword intent, and the whole mountaintop was also damaged to different degrees. Although the two sides did not fall out in the end, in many people's eyes, the grudge was formed. But now the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai suddenly became the sister of the spokesperson of Samsara Palace. Dongqing Wudi's mind was in a mess. The situation between men and women, especially men and women who were different from ordinary people, was almost more chaotic than the general trend of Zhongzhou state. He took out a cigarette, lit it, and took a deep breath. Without thinking, he asked instinctively, "What about Rushi? If she wants, she's also a sister." Qin Weibai said calmly. Li Tianlan only felt a tingling in his scalp. Looking at Qin Weibai, who was more and more graceful and magnanimous, his mood was complicated. He wanted to press her on the bed and spank her. Dongqing Wudi was even more depressed. As soon as he said that, he felt that he was discussing taking a concubine with Li Tianlan's legal wife. This matter didn't even need Li Tianlan's consent. The legal wife was in charge of the backyard. Dongqing Wudi smoked in silence and did not respond. His precious daughter was going to be Li Tianlan's concubine? He, the god of massacre of Zhongzhou state, really could not think of this in a short time. Is it time? Let's go? Qin Weibai looked down at the watch on her wrist and looked at Li Tianlan. There was a soft smile in her bright eyes. She suddenly remembered a pair of Vacheron Constantin watches that she had ordered a few days ago. They were lovers' watches. It seemed that her and Li Tianlan's names could be engraved on the hands of each watch. The faces of the watches were also engraved with blessings written in ancient Greek. A director of Richemont Group, the manufacturer of Vacheron Constantin, personally urged the designer to design the renderings. Qin Weibai was satisfied, but her only regret was that she had to wait a year to wear the couple's watches with Li Tianlan. This kind of thinking that belonged to a little woman or even a little girl might be a little naive, but Qin Weibai had become more and more unable to restrain her feelings. Especially when she woke up in the dead of night and felt Li Tianlan holding her tightly in his arms, Qin Weibai always felt that this was her destiny. Her life belonged to him. She even wanted to announce to the whole world that he was her man and would always be her man from now on. Qin Weibai looked at Li Tianlan quietly. Her eyes were bright and tender, with a kind of deep affection that could shake people's souls. Her persistence seemed eternal. Li Tianlan walked up to her and held her cold hand. He nodded and said, "Let's go." The place that Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang had agreed with Zhong Yongming was Tongha Hospital. The hospital was not large, about 50 acres in area. The internal planning was reasonable, with rockery and flower beds in picturesque disorder. A small river about 6 or 7 meters wide flowed around the hospital. The water was clear and running. Stepping on the white stone bridge, listening to the sound of the water and looking at the flowers in front of them, everything around them seemed to become deep and quiet, making people feel relaxed and happy. This hospital looked inconspicuous from the outside but could be said to be a different world inside. It could be said to be the best private hospital in Huading, even in the south. The medical level and advanced equipment were second to none. The interior was even more heavily guarded. With the 9-story main building in the courtyard as the center, everything in the hospital could be said to be mysterious, and the security and ornamental value could not be better. The hospital was not listed, and it was not open to the public on weekdays. Instead, it implemented a system similar to membership. On weekdays, most of the senior people in Huading were recuperating here, or some people with sensitive identities came here to temporarily avoid the disturbances of the outside world. Therefore, most of the time, there was a cold and quiet atmosphere of leisure here. The boss of Tongha Hospital was the Han family. As the top neutral wealthy family in Huading and the largest financial tycoon in Zhongzhou State, Han Donglu, the current patriarch of the Han family, treated all the people of the six equally. Therefore, if the people of the six were not feeling well, almost all of them would choose to come to Tongha Hospital. Zhong Yue, who was beaten into a vegetative state by Wang Xiaoyao a few months ago. Zhong Xiaofeng, who was disabled by Li Tianlan a few days ago. Now they were all receiving treatment in Tongha Hospital. Zhong Yongming knew why Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang invited Zhong Yongming. Now that Samsara had destroyed Night Spirit and was in the limelight, and Li Tianlan had a close relationship with Qin Weibai, the spokesperson of Samsara. This identity made Zhong Yongming have to bear it for the time being, no matter how much he hated Li Tianlan. But they asked to meet at this place. Obviously, even if they compromised, they had reservations. Zhong Yongming, as a member of the decision-making committee, was also the leader of Huading. He could be said to be one of the most powerful figures in the whole Zhongzhou state. Even if it was a temporary concession, it was a courteous advance and retreat, not a bottomless groveling. Tianlan, the headmaster, and I are now as lobbyists invited by Boss Qin. Do you understand what I mean? Walking into the hospital, Dongqing Wudi suddenly spoke with concern in his eyes. Li Tianlan nodded silently. For the sake of protecting his identity, neither Zhuang Huayang nor Dongqing Wudi was suitable to show too much concern for him. Zhuang Huayang glanced at him, sighed softly, and shook his head without saying much. In recent years, the academics had been cooperating with Samsara, and the cooperation was pleasant. Now, through the transfer of Dongqing Wudi's wife, by Qingqian, the academics announced an alliance with the Dongqing clan in a very high-profile manner. In this way, it seemed reasonable for Qin Weibai to invite Zhuang Huayang and Dongqing Wudi to be lobbyists for Li Tianlan, and no one would think of Li Tianlan. As for in Yonghua Villa, Dongqing Wudi's domineering appearance deterred the elites of the Eastern Theater of Operations, and Ning Qianqing was also a shield. At present, the most suspicious thing was that Dongqing Wudi took Li Tianlan back to Zhongyuan province. This was an unconcealable loophole. Presumably, many people were speculating about the relationship between Li Tianlan and the Dongqing clan. However, the Li family and the Dongqing clan didn't seem to have much interaction on the surface. This alone wouldn't expose Li Tianlan's identity. Moreover, Dongqing Wudi only took him back to Zhongyuan province once because Li Tianlan possessed the wind and thunder veins. This matter could barely be explained as the Dongqing clan's solicitation, or the cooperation between the Dongqing clan and the Samsara palace. This series of things could barely remove Li Tianlan from the picture. Although the details couldn't stand scrutiny, the best thing was that outsiders didn't know the details at all except those involved. As long as they couldn't find out Li Tianlan's identity, they could only come to countless inexplicable conclusions no matter how much they guessed. Moreover, the storm in the dark world was about to rise, and the undercurrents were also surging inside Zhongzhou State. The alliance between the Dongqing clan and the academics had been confirmed. At this time, no one would pay too much attention to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan laughed at himself. Qin Weibai didn't know martial arts, but her current status was quite popular. In everyone's eyes, he should be a gigolo who depended on Qin Weibai now, right? We must keep a low profile later. It's not that Marshall and I can't be tough, but once we do so, it will arouse Zhong Yongming's suspicion. So we will put ourselves in the right position. If we can reach an agreement today, Zhong Xiaofeng's matter will be in the past, and at least you will be given enough time to grow up. Zhuang Huayang said solemnly. Lowering his posture and reconciling with Zhong Yongming was the best way at present. The grievances between Li Tianlan and the Zhong family could be handled from the official point of view, but the Zhong family was also a top wealthy and powerful family in Huading. Their revenge in private would only be more cruel. Now Qin Weibai had invited two heavyweight lobbyists. As long as Zhong Yongming could nod in front of Zhuang Huayang and Dongqing Wudi today, it would be impossible for him to change his mind in a short time. Nowadays, the storm in the dark world, the undercurrent in Huading, and the sensitive situation of the midterm change in Zhongzhou State were mixed together. It could be said that a slight change in one part would affect the whole situation. If Zhong Yongming changed his mind in private, it would be tantamount to becoming enemies with Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang. This consequence must be carefully considered for him, who had more ambitions. In other words, if Zhong Yongming was willing to nod today, even if he changed his mind in the future, it would be after the change in 2 years. At that time, everything would almost be settled, and he would have fewer scruples when he took action. And with 2 years to grow up, Li Tianlan would not be afraid of some private tricks of the Zhong family. This was the best situation that everyone could fight for Li Tianlan at present. It had become their consensus to wait for Li Tianlan to grow up quietly. Yes. Li Tianlan nodded and said with a smile, I know that a little impatience will spoil great plans. Zhuang Huayang glanced at Qin Weibai intentionally or unintentionally and smiled slightly bitterly. He believed that Li Tianlan could bear it. A guy who carried the glory of the god of war family for hundreds of years. A guy who carried all the grievances of the whole family and even Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun. A guy who grew up in the harsh environment of the border and had not been crushed by the pressure. Such a person, if necessary, could bear any humiliation calmly. But Li Tianlan could bear it, but could Qin Weibai beside him? Not to mention Qin Weibai, could Wang Yuetong, the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai, who had followed them here, bear it? Zhuang Huayang and Dongqing Wudi looked at each other, both worried. Zhong Yongming was forced to compromise. It was certain that he would make things difficult for Li Tianlan. But no one could tell whether Qin Weibai and Wang Yuetong would lose their temper or not. It was really hard to say what the result of this negotiation would be. The 5 people walked into the hall of the hospital in turn. In the hall, a young man in his 30s, who looked very gentle and quiet, came over and shook hands with Dongqing Wudi. He said with a lukewarm smile, Hello, General. I'm Secretary Zhong's secretary, Xiao He. Secretary Zhong asked me to take you up. Dongqing Wudi raised his eyebrows slightly, and he suddenly became fierce. Although he knew that this negotiation would be difficult, looking at the other party's appearance, Zhong Yongming could even be said to have no sincerity at all. Zhong Yongming was a member of the decision-making committee, and he was also a member of the decision-making committee. They were at the same level. Zhuang Huayang, a highly respected old principal, and Qin Weibai, who had a sensitive identity, only sent a secretary to greet them, and it was not an administrative secretary. Dongqing Wudi had never seen Xiao He before. He thought that he was similar to a personal secretary. Such neglect could be said to be extremely rude. Dongqing Wudi glanced at Zhuang Huayang, whose face was also a little ugly. Let's go. Qin Weibai glanced at Xiao He and said calmly. Xiao He had been staring at Qin Weibai with amazement. As a result, Qin Weibai glanced at him. Her eyes, which were not cold, were as oppressive as a mountain. He suddenly sobered up, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. A woman who could negotiate with his master, Secretary Zhong, was not someone he could touch, no matter how young she was. He smiled humbly, led the way into the elevator, and went straight to the VIP ward on the 6th floor. The decoration in the ward was luxurious and comfortable, and the light blue walls looked extremely warm. Xiao He walked through the living room with the 5 people behind him. After entering the ward, he said respectfully, Secretary Zhong, the guests are here. Li Tianlan recognized the top leader of Huading at a glance. He had seen the news in Huading yesterday. Zhong Yongming was nearly 60 years old this year, but he looked less than 50 years old. His dyed black hair was neatly combed, and he had a square face. He was dressed in a suit and leather shoes, giving off a solemn and meticulous feeling. He was dignified and had a steady aura. Zhong Xiaofeng had woken up, but with all his bones broken, he was paralyzed on the bed like a puddle of mud. Except for his eyeballs, he had no moving organs at all. When Li Tianlan and the others walked in, Zhong Yongming was sitting silently on the bed, smoking. No one knew what he was thinking. Hearing Xiao He's words, Zhong Yongming turned his head and glanced at them. His eyes fell on Li Tianlan almost immediately. Li Tianlan knew that Zhong Yongming did not know martial arts, but at this moment he still felt a strong and irresistible pressure coming on his face, heavy and cold. That was the momentum brought by absolute power to Zhong Yongming, which made his every move and every look bring suffocating pressure. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and looked at Zhong Yongming quietly. Through his eyes, Li Tianlan could clearly feel the coldness and rage in his eyes, which were undisguised killing intent and resentment. Li Tianlan's expression was calm, and even his voice revealed a kind of unchanging gentleness. He nodded and took the initiative to greet them. "Hello, Secretary Zhong. General, Headmaster, and Boss Qin, come and sit here." On the sofa in the ward, a tall middle-aged man in a military uniform stood up and said with a smile. Dong Qingwudi glanced at him and said nothing. Zhuang Huayang laughed and said, "Oh, it's Changjiang. Why are you here?" Lieutenant General Gu Changjiang, Director of Huading's Special Operations Bureau. His appearance here today was enough to show that Zhong Yongming also had some concerns about his own safety, so he asked him to be a bodyguard. Kunlun City was now extremely welcome for any help from the Prince Group. If today's negotiation broke down, perhaps Gu Changjiang would be most happy to see it. Zhuang Huayang thought silently and thoughtfully. "It's just a coincidence." Gu Changjiang smiled, and his performance was impeccable. Dong Qingwudi was not so patient. Feeling Zhong Yongming's cold eyes, he said flatly, "Comrade Yongming, this is Tianlan. Can we go out and have a talk?" "I'm not good at all." Zhong Yongming finally spoke, but he ignored Dong Qingwudi. He just looked at Li Tianlan and said in a cold tone, "I don't need your greetings. You disabled my son. In any case, you at least owe my son an apology." He stood up, walked up to Li Tianlan, and said word by word, "A most sincere apology, right?" "You're right," Li Tianlan said in a calm tone, and his face did not change. Zhong Yongming narrowed his eyes and looked seriously at the young man who could capture Qin Weibai's heart. After a long time, he gently twitched the corner of his mouth and said flatly, "We can talk about other things later." He pointed to the direction of the bed and ordered, "Now, you go to kneel to my son and say you're sorry 10 times, and I can consider letting you go for the time being." Kneel down and say you're sorry 10 times, and I can let you go for the time being. Except for Li Tianlan, everyone's face changed at the same time. No one expected that as soon as they met, Zhong Yue directly made a request that they could not accept. "Secretary Zhong," Zhuang Huayang frowned. Zhong Yue waved his hand and directly interrupted Zhuang Huayang's words. He said calmly, "You can choose not to kneel. Marshal Dongqing and Headmaster Zhuang are here, and Boss Qin is also here. I can't do anything to you. If you don't kneel, then go back and wait. I can compromise, but it depends on whether you are willing to kneel." This was Zhong Yongming's attitude, firm and unchangeable. Perhaps Li Tianlan not kneeling was the result he most wanted to see. Sitting on the other side, Gu Changjiang looked at Li Tianlan and then looked at Zhong Yongming. His eyes were playful, but he did not speak. Zhong Yongming was extremely angry, but Gu Changjiang was still rational. Now 4 of the 5 people who came here were scheduled, but one of them was the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai, which was interesting. The situation was unclear, so Gu Changjiang could not speak. "Secretary Zhong, your request makes me see no sincerity in negotiation." Qin Weibai held Li Tianlan's hand and said in a cold tone, "Boss Qin, do you mean that my son's life is not worth your man's kneel? But he is still alive. But what's the difference between him and being dead?" Zhong Yongming and Qin Weibai confronted each other tit for tat, and the momentum suddenly became oppressive. "All right." Li Tianlan suddenly opened his mouth and loosened his hand. His smile was gentle and calm. Looking at Zhong Yongming's increasingly cold eyes, he smiled and said, "Secretary Zhong, you are right. It's worth it." "The kneel," Zhong Yongming said in a cold tone. Li Tianlan took a step forward. "Tianlan, senior brother." Qin Weibai and Wang Yuetong spoke at the same time. Li Tianlan turned around and glanced at them. He smiled and narrowed his eyes. "It's really worth it, isn't it?" He turned around and walked directly to the bed. On the bed, Zhong Xiaofeng's eyes turned. He seemed to hear the conversation in the ward, and his breathing became rapid. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm. Whether Zhong Yongming's request was excessive or not, From different standpoints, there would be different interpretations. He knew very well that even if he did not kneel today, Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang would be willing to block some follow-up things for him. But there were some things that he could not afford to owe, the Li family could not afford to owe, and he did not want Qin Weibai to owe him. Since he could bear some things by himself, he must bear them by himself. Even if it crushed his spine, even if it crushed his knees. At least if it was just some humiliation, he could bear it and he could kneel. Qin Weibai looked at Li Tianlan's back silently, bit her lip hard, and suddenly took a step forward. Dongqing Wudi directly stood in front of Qin Weibai. "Get out of my way." Qin Weibai's expression was cold. "Calm down." Dongqing Wudi's eyes were complicated. "You are Tianlan's woman, so you should respect his decision. Sometimes it takes more courage to kneel than to stand up straight. Like now." Bang. A dull voice sounded. Before Qin Weibai could speak, Li Tianlan's knees had directly knelt on the ground in front of the bed. As he said, he knelt in exchange for Zhong Xiaofeng's life. It was worth it. But the premise was that it was a whole life. Li Tianlan knelt in front of Zhong Xiaofeng with a calm face and even a hint of a smile in his tone. It was very light and soft, but in Zhong Yongming's ears, it was cold and even made his scalp tingle. Chapter 94. It's a little late to post the 7,500 chapters. I wish you a speedy recovery. During the days when Zhong Xiaofeng was hospitalized, Zhong Yongming had heard too many such words on the phone or in this ward. The son of the top leader of Huading was disabled. Too many people couldn't wait to express their concern. Which of those people who struggled in the system was not a real actor? His words were really sincere and warmed people's hearts. No matter on the surface or inside, there was no fault to be found. But when Li Tianlan knelt in front of the hospital bed and said this again, Zhong Yongming didn't feel hypocritical. Between the lines, what he heard from Li Tianlan's mouth was genuine sincerity and apology. How shrewd did he have to be able to do this? For a moment, the hair on Zhong Yongming's body stood on end. Looking at Li Tianlan kneeling in front of the hospital bed and seriously saying sorry and wishing him a speedy recovery, Zhong Yongming's heart became colder and colder, and the killing intent in his eyes became more and more naked and undisguised. From those sincere apologies, Zhong Yongming didn't hear any shame, anger, or unwillingness. Li Tianlan was kneeling on the ground and looking up at Zhong Xiaofeng on the hospital bed, but at this moment, Zhong Yongming felt that he was still standing straight and looking down at them. This feeling was subtle and obvious, but it was real. At least, Li Tianlan's kneeling did not bring Zhong Yongming pleasure, but strong uneasiness and fear. This young man's mind was too secretive, and he was also too patient. It was the first time Zhong Yongming had seen a person who could kneel under pressure and still be so calm. Not to mention anything else. Just his unfathomable shrewdness alone would be enough to cause him big trouble in the future if he succeeded. "Child Zhong, I'm sorry. I wish you a speedy recovery." Over and over again, Li Tianlan said it 10 times seriously. Then he turned his head, looked at Zhong Yongming, and said with a smile, "Secretary Zhong, can I get up now?" Zhong Yongming became more and more agitated. In any case, this young man must not be kept alive. Letting him go today was almost like letting a tiger go back to the mountain. Given a little time, who knew how far he would grow? Should he kill him at the risk of becoming enemies with Zhuang Huayang and Dongqing Wudi? Dongqing clan. Academics. Judging from the trend in the next 2 years, it was almost impossible for the Prince group to live in harmony with them. However, the game between groups and personal grievances were completely different. Thinking of Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang, Zhong Yongming hesitated, but on the surface, he remained indifferent and dignified. "Keep kneeling." Dongqing Wudi obviously frowned. Before he could say anything, Qin Weibai, who was staring at Zhong Yongming, suddenly broke out. Her voice was still cold and pleasant, but it became a little sharp. "Zhong Yongming, don't be so shameless. Reconciling with you today doesn't mean that I'm afraid of you. At worst, I won't stay in Zhongzhou state anymore. Outside the country, he can also enter the invincible realm. Do you really think you can cover the sky with one hand? She took a deep breath. Her expression did not change, but her tone became sharper. At this moment, Qin Weibai did not have that dazzling dreamy look, but her whole person showed a kind of craziness and arrogance to protect her man at all costs. The two states were completely different, but they were both peerless in beauty. Zhong Yongming, you don't give me face, so I don't have to give you face. In Zhongzhou state I can't afford to offend you, but now I will say it only once. Help my man up from the bed of your useless son and apologize to him. I will count to 3. If you don't do it, the whole samsara will immediately go to war with your prince group, and it will not stop until one of us is dead. Everyone, including Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayong, changed their faces dramatically. This was no longer pure madness, but true hysteria. She would not stop until the prince group was dead. No one would doubt Qin Weibai's words. Qin Weibai had been in Huading for 5 years. Although she was not famous, people who knew her knew that Boss Qin always kept her word. Moreover, what happened on Mount Dibing in Beihai had also spread in Zhongzhou state. The master of Samsara Palace dared to fight with Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong of Zhongzhou state with serious injuries for her sister. She regarded the Wang family of Beihai and the Southeast group as nothing. Why didn't she dare to go to war with the prince group? Samsara's industry in Zhongzhou state was extremely limited. When it was lost, the master of Samsara Palace, with the murderous weapon Blue Sky Underworld, would directly enter Zhongzhou state with the 12 supermasters and fight with the prince group to death. At that time, the whole Zhongzhou state would face a shocking change. And in such a grudge, not to mention what the Wang family of Beihai would do, even their closest ally, Kunlun City, might not do its best to help them. From the perspective of the whole Zhongzhou state, if the prince group suffered heavy losses, the current ruling group, the academics, would also be to blame. Are you threatening me? Zhong Yongming became furious after his face changed dramatically. He looked at Qin Weibai and asked in a cold tone. Qin Weibai ignored him and spoke again. Her cold and pleasant voice echoed in the ward, but it was like a curse of death and doomsday. Zhong Yongming looked hesitant. If what Qin Weibai said was true, once the Samsara Palace fought with the prince group to death, he might become a sinner of Zhongzhou state, not to mention anything else. A superpower that could have maintained a good cooperative relationship with Zhongzhou state became enemies because of his son. Even a director giant could not afford such a consequence, not to mention that he was a member of the decision-making committee. If things really got out of hand, no matter what happened to Samsara and Zhongzhou state in the future, he would have to bear the consequences. It would be a light punishment to be dismissed on the spot. 3. Qin Weibai strode forward. Her high-heeled shoes tapped on the floor of the ward firmly and crisply. Gu Changjiang, the director of the Huading Special Operations Bureau, who was completely confused by Qin Weibai's fierce reaction, finally reacted. He stepped to Zhong Yongming and said in a cold tone, "Boss Qin, you want to betray, smack?" Qin Weibai slapped Gu Changjiang directly in the face and said coldly, "Get out." The whole ward was quiet in an instant. Everyone had the same feeling. Qin Weibai, the spokesperson of the Samsara Palace, was completely crazy. Qin Weibai. Gu Changjiang covered his face. His face was unprecedentedly gloomy and ferocious, full of killing intent. Qin Weibai didn't even look at him. She took out her mobile phone and began to make a call without any hesitation. Zhong Yongming stared at Qin Weibai's fingers, and his expression changed. In any case, he could be regarded as the leader of Zhongzhou state. How could he apologize to Li Tianlan because of a threat when his son was disabled? He couldn't do this even if he died. Samsara had just destroyed Night Spirit. At this time, the master of Samsara Palace had a murderous weapon in hand, and the 12 supermasters were all loyal and strong. Now Samsara was indeed trying to win them over before finding out their details. But no matter how hard they tried, as a member of the decision-making committee, he would not apologize to the lover of a spokesperson of Samsara Palace when he was in the right. This was about the dignity of the entire Zhongzhou state. Even if it was a war. Zhong Yongming took a step back, pulled Li Tianlan up, and said in a deep voice, "Enough." Dongqing Wudi took a step forward in time and said, "Boss Qin, forget it. Everyone is here to solve the problem today. No one wants to make things worse, right? How about we each take a step back?" Li Tianlan didn't say anything. He just came to Qin Weibai, reached out to take the mobile phone in her hand, touched her hair, and shook his head slightly. Qin Weibai, who had been arrogant, suddenly calmed down. She just looked at Zhong Yongming coldly and said nothing. Obviously, she was waiting for Zhong Yongming's statement. In this situation, even Dongqing Wudi was a little jealous. Li Tianlan had obviously become Qin Weibai's reverse scale. If he touched it, she would be furious. Such a peerless beauty protected him at all costs. How could this boy deserve it? How could he deserve it? "Comrade Yongming, Tianlan has expressed his apology. How about we each take a step back and let bygones be bygones?" Dongqing Wudi glanced at Zhong Yongming and said calmly. Although Qin Weibai's rage made everyone a little embarrassed, the following negotiation was much easier. "I won't make trouble for him within 2 years." Zhong Yongming's tone was cold. In 2 years, the dust of the midterm election would settle. The rising Samsara Palace would presumably merge into the dark world again and be constrained by the superpowers. He would be one step closer then. And most importantly, even if Li Tianlan had grown in 2 years, he wouldn't be too terrible. At that time, he would deal with Li Tianlan as a giant of the decision-making committee. Who could protect him? 2 years. Dongqing Wudi thought for a while, looked at Zhong Yongming and said seriously, "Really?" Zhong Yongming nodded with no expression on his face. He knew very well that it was difficult to go back on what he had promised in front of Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang. Within 2 years, even if he did something, he would never let anyone find out the evidence. In that case, Comrade Yongming, take good care of the patient. Goodbye. Dongqing Wudi nodded and shook hands with Zhong Yongming to say goodbye. "Go? Where can you go? This woman slapped me. Are you just going to let it go?" A cold and gloomy voice rang out, sounding somewhat deranged. Everyone in the ward frowned at the same time. "What do you want?" Dongqing Wudi glanced at Gu Changjiang and raised his eyebrows slightly. He was the marshal of Zhongzhou State and a member of the decision-making committee. In terms of rank, only Zhong Yongming could be on an equal footing with him in the whole ward. Gu Changjiang was just a lieutenant general. Even if he was a lieutenant general who enjoyed the treatment of a governor, Dongqing Wudi did not take him seriously. "What do I want?" Gu Changjiang sneered, his eyes ferocious. "Marshal Dongqing, I'm the director of Huading's Special Operations Bureau of Zhongzhou State. Here, I represent the face of Huading's special warfare system." He patted his face and said in a colder tone, "And now, my face has been slapped by a foreign force. Marshal, as the commander of the Border Praetorian Corps of Zhongzhou State, you ask me what I want. What's your position?" Dongqing Wudi frowned and said indifferently, "Boss Qin is a friend of Zhongzhou State." "A friend?" Gu Changjiang straightened up and sneered. "I don't think so. When I go back, I'll write a report and submit it to Kunlun City. I think Qin Weibai has a serious tendency to commit treason. I'll question your political position and the political position of the Sky Academy to Kunlun City. Why does Kunlun City like to label others as treason?" Li Tianlan suddenly asked in a serious and calm tone. Gu Changjiang was slightly stunned, but he did not think much about it. He just said coldly, "What? You want to speak for people who have a tendency to commit treason? Are you qualified? Or do you also want to commit treason?" Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and said calmly, "You don't seem to be qualified to pronounce us guilty of treason, do you?" "Qualified?" Gu Changjiang's smile was cold. "In Huading, if I say you commit treason, you are a traitor. I know you, a genius with wind and thunder veins in this year's Sky Academy. From the standpoint of a senior, I advise you to correct your position. You'd better stay away from the woman around you. In the dark world, no one dares to fight against Zhongzhou State, let alone threaten Zhongzhou State. So what if the master of Samsara Palace is strong? Is she stronger than Li Kuangtu, the traitor 20 years ago? When Li Kuangtu attempted to defect to Annan State, wasn't he killed at the border? If the master of Samsara Palace dares to come to Zhongzhou State, she will end up the same. Li Kuangtu. This name had shrouded the high-level political life of Zhongzhou State like a dark cloud for many years. No matter people's impression of him was positive or negative, it was undeniable that he was indeed a rare genius in Zhongzhou State in the past 100 years. He practiced the peak chapters of the map of God of War and entered the Invincible Realm at the age of 35. When he just entered the Invincible Realm, he ranked among the top 5 on the divine list. He defeated Xue Qingming, a veteran expert of the Invincible Realm in Jade Pool, with 3 moves. Gu Xingyun, who entered the Invincible Realm at the same time, could not hold on for more than 3 minutes. He had a sword discussion with Lu Xingwuji, the master of Sword of East Island, and a battle with a giant of the Vatican. All these deeds showed that if Li Kuangtu was still alive, he would be a peerless expert who was most likely to compete with Wang Tianzong for the first place on the divine list. Similarly, this was also the strongest trader that Zhongzhou State had killed in decades. He had been dead for many years, but his martial arts still existed in the dark world. In the past 2 decades, few people could surpass him. The Samsara Palace was indeed in the limelight now. Even the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State had to show a certain degree of goodwill to maintain their relationship with the Samsara Palace. But showing goodwill did not mean fear. Qin Weibai did not know when to stop. Once the master of Samsara Palace insisted on going her own way, would the whole Zhongzhou State be afraid of a superpower in the dark world? It was a joke. Once Qin Weibai's attitude was spread today, presumably many high-level officials of Zhongzhou State would slightly change their views on the Samsara Palace. At the very least, some powerful figures would knock Qin Weibai down while showing goodwill. Gu Changjiang's eyes flickered. Although Zhongzhou State was now trying to win over the Samsara Palace, Kunlun City quite disliked this organization that was getting closer to Zhongzhou State. In recent years, the Academy and the Samsara Palace had more and more cooperation, while Kunlun City and the Prince Group had a tendency to drift apart. Under such circumstances, the cooperation between the Academy and the Samsara Palace would only harm the interests and actual power of Kunlun City more and more. If possible, it would be better to destroy the Samsara Palace when it just became powerful. Gu Changjiang's mind was full of cruel calculations, but he did not notice that as he spoke, Li Tianlan's eyes had suddenly narrowed. No matter what, you can't kill Li Kuangtu. What do you have to show off? Li Tianlan said calmly. Humph, in that battle, although I didn't kill Li Kuangtu, among the thunder-shocking scripture experts who besieged him, I was the first to hurt him. As soon as I saw him, I pierced his back. Gu Changjiang was thinking about how to use today's event to change the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State's view on the Samsara Palace. When he was absent-minded, he heard Li Tianlan's words and spoke subconsciously without thinking. When he was halfway through, he realized something was wrong and suddenly looked up. In his sight, almost everyone was looking at him with strange eyes. Li Tianlan's eyes had completely narrowed, and there was a sharp killing intent flashing in his eyes. Even his snow-white hair seemed to be burning, revealing a kind of extremely sharp sword intent. Gu Changjiang was shocked, but he calmed down instantly and felt a burst of chagrin. For the first time in decades, he was slapped in the face. The strong humiliation almost made him completely lose his mind. When he recalled what he had just said, he wanted to slap himself to death. There were some things that even if he wanted to do, he should never say it. And how could he talk about Li Kuangtu, the taboo figure, when he was so excited? What was wrong with him? He was impetuous. He was impetuous. Li Tianlan's voice continued to ring in his ears. Among the people who besieged Li Kuangtu, you were the first to hurt him? His voice was strange and seemed to be trembling, and there was a kind of almost uncontrollable killing intent. Traitors deserve to die. Gu Changjiang took a deep breath, forced himself to calm down, and said indifferently, Yes, traitors deserve to die. Li Tianlan chuckled. Traitors deserve to die, but who was the real traitor in the matter of that year? At this moment, Li Tianlan's mind was roaring, and the almost uncontrollable killing intent was surging wildly in his heart. Qin Weibai held Li Tianlan's hand tightly. Zhuang Huayang and Dongqing Wudi looked at each other, and there was deep worry in their eyes. Seeing this scene, Gu Changjiang had a flash of inspiration. A guess that he had never thought of directly appeared in his mind, and instantly became extremely clear. Li Tianlan's surname was Li, a genius with wind and thunder veins. Samsara appeared inexplicably many years ago. A leader of the academics had entered the southwest border several times. Dongqing Wudi took over Li Guangtu's position. Tribulation, the deputy governor of Sai City, suddenly appeared unexpectedly in the Sky Academy 2 days ago. Gu Changjiang's breathing became more and more rapid. He had never thought of this possibility before, but now that it appeared, everything seemed to make sense. Li Tianlan. Was he the successor of the Li family? In his sight, Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang still looked calm. But this calmness was different in Gu Changjiang's eyes. The academics, the Dongqing clan, Sai City, and the foreign Samsara Palace. If Li Tianlan was really the successor of the Li family, how many forces had he connected in such a short time? Gu Changjiang felt cold all over. There was the excitement of discovering a major secret, the panic of discovering the seriousness of the matter, and the joy of discovering the problem in time. He was glad that it was still early, and the key point of these forces, Li Tianlan, was far from growing up. Otherwise, when Li Tianlan entered the invincible realm, or even entered the thunder-shocking scripture, Kunlun City might face unprecedented challenges. Gu Changjiang's heart was beating wildly, but his expression was getting calmer and calmer. In any case, he had to tell the governor about it at once. He had to kill Li Tianlan at all costs. Once Li Tianlan died, the forces connected by him would naturally collapse, and then there would be nothing to worry about. I'll keep what happened today in mind. Gu Changjiang glanced at Qin Weibai coldly and said directly, "Goodbye. Let's go too." Li Tianlan took Qin Weibai's hand and said in a calm tone. They went out almost at the same time. Zhong Yongming, whose face was extremely gloomy, finally got up to see them off out of courtesy. They entered the elevator with their own thoughts, and the atmosphere was stiff. The elevator went straight to the first floor. Li Tianlan walked out of the elevator and suddenly said, "I need to go to the bathroom." Gu Changjiang took a deep look at him. He wanted to test something, but he was afraid of being suspected, so he simply turned around and left the hospital in a hurry. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that Li Tianlan might be the successor of the Li family. As long as he had this guess, the following investigation would not be very difficult. It didn't matter whether he tested or not. He walked out of the hospital and got into his Mercedes-Benz. He immediately took out his mobile phone and dialed Gu Xingyun, the governor of Kunlun City. The phone was turned off. Gu Changjiang frowned slightly and dialed Gu Xingyun's secretary again. The phone was still turned off. The dark world was in turmoil, and the busiest one was naturally the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. Gu Xingyun spent most of his time in meetings, so it was normal that he could not be contacted. Gu Changjiang was a little hesitant, wondering if he should call Gu Qianchuan to tell him about it. He thought for a long time and finally shook his head gently. He said to the driver in front of him in a deep voice, "Go to the airport. I'm going back to Yuzhou, right now." The Mercedes-Benz started slowly and went straight to the airport. At the gate of the hospital, Zhuang Huayang, who was waiting for Li Tianlan to come back, was still holding Zhong Yongming's hand and smilingly asking him to visit the Sky Academy when he had time. Li Tianlan came back quickly. In less than 2 minutes, he walked from the direction of the bathroom to Qin Weibai and whispered, "Let's go." He politely shook hands with Zhong Yongming and said goodbye with an apologetic smile. He looked extremely sincere. They walked out of the hospital under Zhong Yongming's indifferent eyes. At the gate of the hospital, Qin Weibai, who had been holding hands with Li Tianlan, turned around and looked at Li Tianlan. She said reluctantly, "I'm leaving." Li Tianlan nodded silently. He hesitated and whispered, "How long will you be gone?" "About 3 months. So, Qin Weibai said softly. 3 months. Qin Weibai went to take care of the master of Samsara Palace. It took 3 months to recuperate with the body of an invincible realm expert, which showed that the master of Samsara Palace was seriously injured. Li Tianlan nodded gently and said nothing. "I'm relieved to have my sister take care of you." Qin Weibai smiled and looked at Wang Yuetong beside Li Tianlan. Her tone was soft. Li Tianlan's scalp went numb. He could not figure out what Qin Weibai meant. He could only watch her get into the car and leave without saying a word. Flaming fire drove through the rain and went further and further away from Li Tianlan. In the rain, everything behind became blurred. The light in the car was dim. Qin Weibai's face looked paler in the dim light. She took out a bottle of mineral water from the car and took a sip. She said calmly, "Is horsewoman's business done?" Flaming fire said, "She's already on her way to the airport." Qin Weibai said, at the gate of the hospital. Watching Qin Weibai's car leave, Zhuang Huayang finally said with a smile, "You two little guys, will you go back to the Sky Academy with me now?" He pointed to Wang Yuetong and said meaningfully, "These 200 credits are yours now." Li Tianlan was silent for a moment and suddenly said, "Headmaster, Marshal, who can lend me a car?" After Qin Weibai left, there were 2 cars left. Dongqing Wudi's black Land Rover and Zhuang Huayang's black Mercedes-Benz were both parked here. Dongqing Wudi was stunned. He subconsciously threw the car key in his hand to Li Tianlan and asked in confusion, "What else do you want?" "I suddenly remembered that I haven't taken something. I'll go get it." Li Tianlan smiled and handed the key to Wang Yuetong. "Let's go now. We'll go back to the Sky Academy after we get it." Wang Yuetong obediently said, "Oh," and walked to the Land Rover, purely like a well-behaved little wife. Li Tianlan nodded to Dongqing Wudi and Zhuang Huayang, then turned and walked to the Land Rover. The Land Rover slowly started, pierced the rain, and gradually went away. "This guy is really worrisome." Zhuang Huayang watched the Land Rover go farther and farther. He hesitated and said, "Follow him. Don't let him make any more trouble." In the passenger's seat of the Land Rover, Li Tianlan's white hair was like fire, and he was as quiet as a mountain. "Senior brother, where are we going? What are we going to take?" Wang Yuetong asked subconsciously as she drove the Land Rover, which was a little cumbersome. "We still need a head. Let's go get it now," Li Tianlan said calmly. He took out his mobile phone and dialed the number of Lu Shuyuan, the head of the Curtain Intelligence Organization. At the same time, in the hospital ward, Zhong Yongming also returned to the ward with his secretary. After everyone left, this top leader of Huading, who had been extremely indifferent throughout, suddenly looked a little tired. The strong Qin Weibai, the calm Dongqing Wudi, the smiling Zhuang Huayang, the quiet and frightening Li Tianlan, even the cold Gu Changjiang's performance today was more confident than his. The situation was complicated. In the relatively transparent circle of politics, Zhong Yongming only felt mentally and physically exhausted. He returned to the ward silently. First, he glanced at the bed that seemed to be lifeless, then sat down on the sofa and lit a cigarette. The bed was quiet. Zhong Yongming, who took a deep drag on the cigarette, suddenly felt that something was wrong and suddenly stood up from the sofa. The bed did not seem to be lifeless. It was really lifeless. Zhong Yongming's heart sank. He quickly walked to the bed and lifted the quilt covering his son. In his sight, a large piece of smoking scarlet blood stained the white sheets, which was indescribably weird and horrible. Zhong Yongming staggered back a step and leaned against the wall. His eyes were ferocious and furious. On the bed, Zhong Xiaofeng was covered with blood, and he was already dead. A large amount of blood soaked his hospital gown, the bed sheet, and slowly dripped along the bed to the ground. Drip, drip. Zhong Xiaofeng's eyes were wide open, and there seemed to be some fear, anger, and unwillingness left in his dim eyes. Fresh blood flowed out of his entire body in an endless stream. Looking at his son's body, Zhong Yongming's lips trembled, but his heart was covered by an absolute chill. He gasped and his eyes were filled with fear. On Zhong Xiaofeng's body, forehead, left and right heart, left and right shoulder, left and right thigh, abdomen, throat, there were a total of 10 stab wounds. Blood was dripping. That was to say, just after he left, someone came back to the ward and stabbed Zhong Xiaofeng 10 times in a row. It was a kind of downright cruel and vicious. Zhong Yongming suddenly thought of Li Tianlan, who left the hospital for 2 minutes and said he wanted to go to the bathroom. His eyes narrowed, and his fingers holding the cigarette trembled violently. In his decades of life, facing his son's body, his first feeling was not anger or hatred, but fear. A kind of fear that came from the soul. He didn't know what the 10 stab wounds in front of him meant. He only knew that in front of this bed, or even just a few minutes ago, Li Tianlan knelt here and said sorry 10 times in a row. 10 stab wounds. The wounds were ferocious. The dark red and mournful blood flowed down the bed. Every drop of blood seemed to tell Zhong Yongming that the young man could bear the humiliation he gave him just now. But he could also kill in the place where he couldn't see. He killed decisively. Zhong Yongming slowly sat on the ground against the wall and kept muttering to himself, "This beast, this lunatic, I really don't want to write this kind of chapter in the middle of the night." Although there are 2 chapters a day in Special Warfare, they are basically big chapters. 1 chapter can cover 2 chapters. So, I really tried my best. Dear readers, if you can give me a subscription, just give me a subscription. I don't ask for a tip, just a subscription. A few yuan a month is enough. Chapter 95. Chapter 2. Try to be done before midnight. Coming out of the hospital, the downtown area of Huading was already stormy. The continuous rain for several days seemed to have entered the final outbreak period. The dense raindrops pattered on the car window, and everything in sight became more and more blurred. The wind whistled through the urban area, and the fallen leaves danced in the mournful and moaning wind. Looking at Huading, which was raining all over the city, from the window, a particularly cold feeling came over them. The black Land Rover was parked on the side of the road. Li Tianlan sat quietly in the car, watching the wind and rain outside the window in silence. There was a crossroad in front of him, and the traffic was moving back and forth. The target vehicle had long since disappeared without a trace. Li Tianlan pulled out a cigarette, lit it, and smoked silently, waiting for the information he needed. The Liu family was indeed a good dog. No matter how strong their inner resistance was, at least the Curtin Intelligence Organization was useful. This intelligence organization had been developing in Huading for decades, and its network had long covered the streets and alleys of Huading. How terrifying was an intelligence organization that had absorbed the financial resources of a wealthy family for decades without expanding outward. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as the Liu family was still in Li Tianlan's hands, at least in Huading, Li Tianlan would not be weaker than anyone in terms of intelligence. So even if the target was lost, Li Tianlan was not worried at all. He just needed to wait for the curtain to lock on again. "Senior brother, you want to kill Gu Changjiang?" Sitting in the driver's seat, Wang Yuetong tilted her head and looked at Li Tianlan. Her tone was complicated. She even felt that Li Tianlan was a bit abnormal. Who is Gu Changjiang? The director of Huading Special Operations Bureau, a lieutenant general of Zhongzhou State who enjoyed the treatment of a governor, could be said to be the representative of the special warfare system in Huading. How could such a person be killed so easily? He deserves to die. Li Tianlan smoked and said softly, "Today is the best chance. If we don't kill him today, we may have to wait for a long time." He hadn't taken the whole Immortal series yet. At this time, his realm was still in the subtle state of 1 thundershocking realm and 1 chi-controlling realm. Before he recovered his peak strength, this could be said to be his strongest moment. He really didn't want to let go of such a good opportunity. Gu Changjiang deserved to be killed regardless of his identity or standpoint. Li Tianlan also regarded killing Gu Changjiang as the last battle for him to step 1 foot into the thundershocking realm. After Gu Changjiang's death, it was time for him to go back to the Sky Academy to cultivate himself. Was he the first person to injure my father out of the group of experts that had besieged him? Li Tianlan smiled, but his eyes were cold without any warmth. But Wang Yuetong opened her mouth, wanting to say something but stopped on second thought. After knowing Li Tianlan's identity, she could completely understand Li Tianlan's killing intent. But Gu Changjiang was not an ordinary expert in the ice-condensing realm or the fire-flaming realm, but an expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. An expert at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm from Kunlun City was different from other experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. In the same realm, due to the difference in absolute arts and inheritances, there might even be a huge difference in combat power. Gu Changjiang's aptitude was relatively average. About 5 years ago, he broke through the stabilization phase of the thundershocking realm and barely entered the peak phase. Then he was transferred to the Huading Special Operations Bureau as the director. It could be assumed that this was the peak of his life, and the possibility of him going further in martial arts was extremely small. But the key was that he was one of the hardcore confidants of Gu Xingyun, the god of war in Zhongzhou State. He had inherited all his unique arts. The name of Kunlun City had appeared in Zhongzhou State for only 20 years, but the Gu family had been one of the strongest martial arts forces in Zhongzhou State for hundreds of years. Their supreme unique arts, the 10 skills of true martial arts, were even said to be on par with the 24 moves of sword. Although Gu Changjiang's aptitude was slightly poor, he had inherited all the skills of Kunlun City, so Wang Yuetong was a little worried about Li Tianlan killing him. For a moment, she even hesitated whether to drive. Anyway, the idiot beside her couldn't drive. If she left the car, he couldn't do anything. "It's okay." Li Tianlan looked at Wang Yuetong and said slowly, "I know what to do." The text message prompt sounded on his mobile phone. Li Tianlan glanced down, narrowed his eyes and said, "Go to Lanqiao Airport, faster." Wang Yuetong hesitated, but still stepped on the accelerator. She drove the Land Rover that she was not used to and went straight to the airport. At the same time, in the Lu family's manor, Lu Shuyuan, whose face was a little pale, silently sent the text message. After a moment of silence, he frowned and said, "He wants to kill Gu Changjiang?" Lu Tianjing, the old mayor of Huading, looked at the teapot in front of him, meticulously watched the fire, and said calmly, "It has nothing to do with us." Lu Xun glanced at his uncle with a complicated expression and said nothing. On the night Li Tianlan came to the manor, he was seriously injured by Li Tianlan almost as soon as they met. When he woke up from a coma, the Lu family had handed over their biggest secret, the Imperial Jade Seal. Everything had become a foregone conclusion and could not be changed at all. Of course, Lu Shuyuan was not reconciled to it. His brother and son were all killed by Li Tianlan, and now he had to be Li Tianlan's dog. Everything in the Lu family had fallen into Li Tianlan's control. In such a terrible situation, he was unable to resist, which was what made him most desperate. "We have no choice." Lu Tianjing poured a cup of tea for his nephew with a poker face and said slowly. Lu Shuyuan was silent. He didn't blame his uncle for compromising. In the face of the survival of the whole family, the deep hatred in the past was not worth mentioning. It seemed humiliating and cruel to kneel and surrender to Li Tianlan, but under the circumstances, if they didn't kneel, they would die. Li Tianlan made it clear that he didn't mind dying with them. Under such an attitude, as long as the whole Lu family didn't want to die, they had no stand to uphold their dignity. This extremely rational approach saved the Lu family, but the point was, "Uncle, what should we do in the future?" Lu Shuyuan finally spoke in a bitter tone. "Let's take it one step at a time." Lu Tianjing sighed deeply and looked a little confused. In the current situation, it was unrealistic to get rid of Li Tianlan's control, unless Lu Shuyuan could enter the invincible realm in one day and suppress everything with absolute strength. By then, even if Li Tianlan exposed the Imperial Jade Seal, the Lu family would have the confidence to deal with it. This was the only way, but it was also the most impossible way at present. Take it one step at a time? Lu Shuyuan smiled bitterly. Today, Li Tianlan asked for Gu Changjiang's whereabouts, and he gave it to him. Who knew what Li Tianlan would ask for tomorrow? As his demands grew, the relationship between the Lu family and Li Tianlan would become closer and closer. They were now an important part of Kunlun City, but Li Tianlan's identity would make him the mortal enemy of Kunlun City in the future. The Lu family would be caught in the middle. If they were not careful, they would be doomed eternally, and they wouldn't even have a chance to struggle. Be the master's dog and don't resist. This is the only way. A calm but seductive voice sounded and spread through the living room. Lu Dongyu came downstairs and looked at her grandfather and father, her tone calm. But the harsh word, master, instantly hurt Lu Shuyuan's sensitive nerves, and his face turned red because of extreme humiliation. He clenched the teacup in his hand and suddenly stood up. He looked at Lu Dongyu and shouted angrily, "Do you want to be a dog so much? Don't forget that it was the so-called master you mentioned who killed your brother and your second uncle." Lu Dongyu walked down the stairs and stood quietly in the living room with a calm expression. Obviously, she had dressed up carefully. She wore light makeup, and her mouth was bright and attractive with lipstick evenly applied. She wore a light-colored sweater with tassels hanging on the chest, and the hem was tucked into a light gray narrow skirt. A pair of calves in black stockings had smooth lines, extending all the way down. She wore a pair of silver stiletto heels nearly 10 centimeters on her small feet. She stood there casually, but her figure was vividly reflected. Mature, proud, and seductive. At this moment, Lu Dongyu's face was expressionless, but her whole body exuded a kind of beautiful and charming woman. She glanced at her father and said calmly, "I haven't forgotten, but does it make sense to say this now?" Lu Xuyuan looked at his seductively dressed daughter, and he was so angry that he blacked out and couldn't speak for a while. On the night Li Tianlan came, his baby daughter was the first to surrender to Li Tianlan. Everyone in the Lu family knew this. Although they all knelt in front of Li Tianlan in the end, there was still a gap between them and Lu Dongyu afterward. That feeling was like one was forced and the other was willing. Although the result was the same, the psychological feeling was completely different. Therefore, after Li Tianlan left, the relationship between Lu Dongyu and all the Lu family became subtle, and the father-daughter relationship with Lu Shuyuan even fell to the freezing point. "Don't you hate him?" Lu Shuyuan resisted the desire to slap his daughter in the face and said in a cold tone, "Hate." Lu Dongyu was stunned for a moment before she calmly spoke. As she spoke, a strange flush suddenly appeared on her face, and the black stockings wrapped around her narrow skirt slightly tightened her beautiful legs. She took a deep breath to ease the strange emotions in her body, but her voice still inevitably trembled a little, with a kind of undetectable charm. "But I know my identity, and I can see the current situation clearly. You obviously have no capital to resist, but you still remember the past hatred and want to fight back and retaliate. Don't you think it's ridiculous?" Lu Shuyuan couldn't bear it anymore and directly raised his palm. At the same time, Lu Dongyu raised her mobile phone and screamed, "If you dare to hit me, I'll call the master right away." Lu Shuyuan gritted his teeth and breathed rapidly, but his hand in the air seemed to be frozen and couldn't fall at all. "Enough!" Lu Tianjing flew into a rage. He slammed the teapot in his hand on the tea table and roared, "Look at you now! Are you still father and daughter? Bastard! Sit down." Lu Dongyu sat on the sofa without saying a word. Her enchanting and charming face was tightly taut, and her expression was cold. Smelling the fragrance of his granddaughter's deliberately sprayed perfume, Lu Tianjing became more and more agitated. He suppressed his temper, looked at Lu Dongyu, and said calmly, "Tell me what you think. Be a good dog. Only when the master grows up completely can we survive." The corner of Lu Tianjing's mouth moved, but he couldn't say anything for a while. When Li Tianlan grew up completely, when he entered the invincible realm, and when he could give the Lu family enough protection, even if they betrayed Kunlun City, they wouldn't have to worry about revenge and survival. But the premise was that they had to be at ease as a dog before that, and they had to wait until that day. Lu Tianjing wasn't sure that he could wait until that day without being exposed. Even if he was sure, it was hard for him to accept being a dog for Li Tianlan from then on. If hatred is really so important, why did you kneel down in front of the master at that time? Lu Dongyu's red lips twitched. She stood up and said coldly, "When the Lu family just got rich, weren't we the dogs of Kunlun City? Now I'm a good dog, at least my descendants still have a chance to be human." She walked quickly out of the villa in high heels, and her voice became colder and colder. "If you can't see the situation clearly, you won't even have the chance to be a dog. You can take revenge, but don't let me know, or I'll tell the master at once to prove my loyalty." She opened the door of the villa, and her seductive figure walked straight out of the villa. It was raining heavily outside. Looking at the rain falling from the sky, Lu Dongyu's eyes became a little blurred. She naturally hated Li Tianlan, and she even gnashed her teeth with hatred. But what no one knew was that on the night Li Tianlan left the Lu family, Lu Dongyu lay in bed, thinking about becoming Li Tianlan's dog. In addition to resentment, there was also a kind of extreme excitement in her heart that she couldn't understand at all. His strength, his overbearingness, his indifference and straightforwardness. The unscrupulous spraying of blood, the whistling and invincible wielding of the silver spear. Every picture seemed to be teasing Lu Dongyu's nerves. The strong man who made her hate his guts was fermenting in her body like poison, even making her body tremble violently. This feeling was very shameful, and Lu Dongyu even felt that she was a psychopath. But she just couldn't control her emotions. That night, she changed 3 pairs of underwear in a row, and even changed the bed sheets in the end, but she still couldn't control her emotions and body. That feeling was like taking drugs. She cried and slapped herself in the face, but that feeling was getting stronger and stronger, and it tortured her to the point that she was better off dead than alive. Lu Dongyu didn't know what was wrong with her. She didn't even dare to see a psychiatrist. The heavy rain kept falling from the gloomy sky. Lu Dongyu gently raised the corner of her rosy and delicate mouth, a little self-deprecating. Maybe it was just like what her lover in Kunlun City said. She was a slut. Or the kind of slut to the bone. Her body stepped into the heavy rain, twisting her sexy and seductive body, and left directly. Out of the hospital, Gu Changjiang had been making phone calls. He called Gu Xingyun's secretary. The relationship between the internal personnel of Kunlun City was complicated. To the outside world, everyone was on the same side. But at the most critical moment, Gu Xingyun didn't dare to trust anyone, because his speculation was really of great importance. Once it became a fact, no one could imagine how big a wave it would set off in Zhongzhou State. There were so many things that could be used in this matter that Gu Changjiang could only choose to report to Gu Xingyun and let him get the first-hand information first. Since he couldn't get through the phone, he could only go to Yuzhou. In the back row of the Mercedes-Benz, Gu Changjiang dialed the number again with his mobile phone. He hesitated and wondered if he should call the governor's wife. He turned the mobile phone in his hand, finally gave a wry smile, shook his head, and said to the driver, "Drive faster." Perhaps it was because of a big secret in his heart. Gu Changjiang was always a little uneasy and even a little uneasy, which made his originally calm mood become anxious. The Mercedes-Benz sped up a little. The driver glanced at the rearview mirror and suddenly said, "Director, a Land Rover has been following us for about 10 minutes. Gu Changjiang was stunned and subconsciously turned his head. In his sight, a black Land Rover with a military license plate followed him unhurriedly. Its purpose was unknown. Dongqing Wudi's car? Gu Changjiang's eyes narrowed tightly, and he was a little puzzled. What was Dongqing Wudi doing? He was a little hesitant. For a moment, he didn't know whether to stop or speed up. With the secret in his heart, he began to worry about gains and losses. Inside the Land Rover, Wang Yuetong looked seriously at the Mercedes-Benz in the heavy rain ahead and said softly, "There are no cameras in front. Senior brother, you must be careful." "It's okay." Li Tianlan rolled down the window, threw the cigarette butt out and said calmly, "Speed up." Wang Yuetong hesitated and stepped on the gas pedal to the end. The black Land Rover engine roared, and the speed suddenly began to soar to the limit. In the back row of the Mercedes-Benz, Gu Changjiang's pupils shrank slightly. Feeling the fierce momentum of the black Land Rover, he said without hesitation, "Speed up and get rid of them." The distance between the two cars suddenly narrowed a little because of the acceleration of the front and the back. Li Tianlan's eyes were calm and demonic, and his white hair moved without wind. A large amount of sword energy spread in the car, and it was extremely condensed. 20 meters. Endless sword light flashed in Li Tianlan's eyes. In the high-speed Land Rover, his body suddenly moved, and his whole body directly broke the front windshield. The silver light flashed in the heavy rain. It broke the raindrops and tore the air. The human emperor became a sword, and the sword intent was like a rainbow. Li Tianlan held the sword with both hands, and his whole body seemed to turn into a sword light, rushing straight to the Mercedes-Benz 20 meters away. The 12th blade. Glamorous. The fastest sword move in the 24 moves of sword. He was fast, and the sword was fast. He and the sword became one. In the heavy rain, everything retreated, and only a sword light flew sharply, with the spirit of a rainbow. The crazy raindrops slanted with the sword. The rain did not fall, but rushed to the Mercedes-Benz ahead. Gu Changjiang subconsciously narrowed his eyes. In the heavy rain, there was no man or sword. In the heavy rain, only the sword intent was whistling up and down, and only the sword light suddenly lit up. A distance of 20 meters. The sword light just flashed, and Li Tianlan's figure had directly landed on the roof of the car. A large amount of sword rain fell on the Mercedes-Benz, and the car sprinted hard in the sword rain. But Li Tianlan's whole body was already filled with thunder light, and the sword edge was full. Swish! The sword edge covered with thunder light pierced the roof, and the thunder light spread wantonly in the car. Li Tianlan's strength was firm, and the whole roof was completely destroyed by the sword. Li Tianlan's eyes were cold and crazy. The first thundershocking realm expert who hurt Li Guangtu. The core figure of Kunlun City. How could he not die? How could he not die? They all deserve to die. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed, and the thunder light became more dazzling. He held the sword and stabbed it down again. Boom! There was a sudden roar on the highway. Gu Changjiang's car exploded in an instant. Fire, thunder, heavy rain, black smoke, and wreckage rolled in all directions in the airwaves. In the center of the explosion, Li Tianlan did not step back and raised his sword again. Ruthless, crazy, indomitable, and indomitable. The sword light had disappeared. Li Tianlan had disappeared. Under the curtain of rain, there was only a sharp light that was enough to tear the world. It tore the sky and the curtain of rain, ignoring everything and fearing nothing. That was the ultimate attack. No one and nothing could make this sharp light retreat half a step. Gu Changjiang was covered with sword light. His body retreated at an unprecedented speed, but the sword intent around him was getting stronger and stronger. This was the supreme unique skill of Kunlun City. The 7th style of 10 skills of true martial arts. 7 unique flowing lights. The sharp light in the center of the battlefield went all the way forward, sweeping everything. The clanging sound between heaven and earth shook the field. The wind and rain changed. When I draw my sword, everyone in the world is a nonentity. When I reach the peak, everything in the world is under my feet. The 15th blade. Samsara. This was the 15th blade in the Invincible Manual. For hundreds of years, the 15th blade only belonged to one person. In an instant, all the wind and rain disappeared, and so did the sword intent. Only that sharp gleam continued to spread out incessantly, as if it was the strongest martial will in several hundred years. Li Tianlan's figure appeared clearly and then quickly blurred. A figure that was sharp enough to shatter the world appeared in front of Gu Changjiang. He was tall and slender. In the illusory environment, all the sword intent between heaven and earth seemed to be swirling and whistling around him. Blood, slaughter, a vast battlefield, mountains of corpses. He didn't move at all, but one scene after another appeared clearly in his mind. He was invincible in the world. No one could stand in front of him. No one could stop his sword. In a trance, it seemed to be another era. He wore a golden mask and stood with a sword, but he had an eternal majesty that dared to shatter the world. The 15th blade. Samsara. Gu Changjiang was scared out of his wits. No matter how many years passed, the dark world would not forget this figure, and no one dared to forget it. Even if the Li family had long disappeared. Even if Xuanyuantai of Kunlun had long fallen. But this figure with a golden mask, his statue still stood in Zongnanhai, still stood on the stage of formidable person in Mount Dibing of Kunlun North Sea, and even in Kunlun City. This was the ancestor who founded Xuanyuantai of Kunlun and the 24 moves of sword. This was the Samsara of the Invincible Manual, the 15th blade that belonged to Li Tianlan alone. For hundreds of years, there had never been such a sharp edge between heaven and earth. The sword intent was chasing after the ancestor. a sword of samsara. The heavy rain dissipated, and the illusory figure suddenly appeared and disappeared. The sharp light between heaven and earth condensed. Li Tianlan fell with his sword. All the sword intent broke out in an instant, as if the sky was falling. In the soaring sword light, the 7 unique flowing lights around Gu Changjiang were instantly shattered. The 20th blade. Shatter the firmament. The sword intent and unique skills that belonged to the ancestor. Everything was perfectly combined after hundreds of years of wind and rain. A sword momentum that seemed to shatter the world appeared and overwhelmed everything. The sword light swept through Gu Changjiang's neck. Blood rose to the sky with the sword intent. Li Tianlan grabbed Gu Changjiang's head and looked at his eyes, which were still open. His expression was calm. Bang! Gu Changjiang's headless body swayed and fell to the ground. Li Tianlan dropped the head in his hand and crushed it with one foot. His essence, qi, and spirit turned from extremely strong to extremely weak. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and slowly walked to the Land Rover in the rain. In the heavy rain, his voice sounded softly and firmly. Give me some more time and I will avenge you. I will avenge all of you, soon. That you're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.